The rope creaked against the wooden beam. A crowd had gathered in the dusty square outside Fort Laramie, their faces showing a mixture of morbid fascination and righteous satisfaction. Some turned away, most did not. The Lakota woman stood on the platform, her weathered face impassive even as the noose was placed around her neck. She was perhaps 50 years old with long, silver-streaked hair that had been roughly shorn at the shoulders, a final indignity. Her crime, according to the hastily arranged military tribunal, witchcraft and poisoning of 2 soldiers. Dr. Sarah Winters gripped her medical bag tighter as she watched from the edge of the crowd. She knew better. The woman, a healer among her people, had tried to treat the soldiers for tuberculosis with traditional remedies when the fort's supplies of Western medicine had run short. When they died anyway, someone needed to be blamed. Sarah had examined the bodies herself. The men had died from the disease, not from poisoning. She had submitted her report stating exactly that. It had been ignored. Witnesses have attested that this woman, known as Rain Crow, did with malice and forethought administer poisonous substances to 2 soldiers of the United States Army. The officer declared, his voice carrying across the now silent square. For this act of murderous hostility, she has been sentenced to hang by the neck until dead. Sarah's hand moved unconsciously to her abdomen, where beneath her loose-fitting dress, a 5-month pregnancy was just beginning to show. She should speak up, should state the medical facts again loudly and publicly. But to contradict a military tribunal's findings would mean the end of her already precarious position at the fort. And then what would become of her and her unborn child? The drumroll began. Sarah closed her eyes. The sharp crack of the trapdoor was followed by a collective gasp from the crowd. When Sarah forced herself to look again, the Lakota healer's body swung gently in the morning breeze, her eyes still open, seeming to stare directly at where Sarah stood. Those eyes would haunt her dreams for years to come. Well, conduct unbecoming an officer of the Medical Corps. Major General Arthur Collins slid the paper across his desk. His gray mustache twitched with discomfort, but his eyes remained cold. Behind him, a map of the Dakota Territory covered the wall with red pins marking military outposts and blue pins indicating known Lakota encampments. "Sir, I don't understand," Sarah said, though she did. "Perfectly. Your condition, Dr. Winters, has become apparent." Collins gestured vaguely toward her midsection. "As you are unmarried, this presents an impossible situation for the Medical Corps." Sarah stood ramrod straight, her hands clasped behind her back to hide their trembling. 10 years as an Army nurse during and after the Civil War, followed by medical training that few women were permitted to complete, and now this. All undone by a single mistake. Or perhaps not a mistake. She had entered the relationship with Dr. Thomas Reed willingly, if unwisely. "The father," she began, "is not relevant to these proceedings." Collins cut her off sharply, then with a slight softening of his tone, "Though I think we both know who it is." "Of course they did." Dr. Thomas Reed, the fort's medical director, who had been her mentor, her lover, and ultimately her betrayer. The married man who had promised that together they would revolutionize frontier medicine, bringing modern techniques to remote outposts. The man who had disappeared on an inspection tour the moment her pregnancy became impossible to hide. "You have 2 weeks to vacate your quarters," Collins continued. "Given your years of service, I've arranged for a letter of recommendation." He hesitated. "Though I should warn you, it speaks only of your nursing abilities, not your medical training." Back to nursing. Years of education erased with a stroke of a pen. "And what does Dr. Reed have to say about all this?" Sarah asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Collins looked uncomfortable. "Dr. Reed has suggested a solution to your predicament. A doctor he knows in Chicago who handles such matters discreetly. An abortionist, of course." "Thank you, General, but I'll manage my own predicament," Sarah said coldly. As she turned to leave, Collins called after her, "Dr. Winters." She paused at the door. "I received your report on those 2 soldiers, the ones the Indian woman supposedly poisoned." He tapped his fingers on his desk. "I want you to know I read it, but these matters are complicated." Sarah didn't respond. She closed the door behind her with a quiet click that somehow felt more final than a slam. The stagecoach bounced violently over the rutted trail that led through the Black Hills toward Deadwood. Inside, Sarah braced herself against the seat, one hand protectively over her abdomen, the other clutching her medical bag. The bag contained her most precious possessions, surgical instruments, medicines, and her notebooks, including the formula she'd been developing for a more effective treatment for tuberculosis. Across from her sat Reverend Philip Hayward, a thin man with a perpetual frown who had been eyeing her bare ring finger with disapproval since they'd left Fort Laramie. Beside him, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood, the wife of a mining investor, occasionally muttered prayers under her breath while clutching her reticule as if Sarah might steal it. The only other passenger was Marcus Wells, a grizzled man with a prospector's weathered skin and calloused hands. He'd been kind to Sarah, helping her with her bags and offering her jerky from his own supplies when they'd stopped to change horses. "Mighty dangerous country we're heading into, ma'am," Wells commented, gazing out the window at the towering pines and granite peaks. "Lakota consider these hills sacred. Don't take kindly to folks like us trespassing. The savages should be grateful for the civilization we bring." Reverend Hayward sniffed. "Gold mining brings prosperity to all." Wells gave a short laugh. "Tell that to the Lakota when they're attacking your mining camp." "The Army will protect us," Mrs. Blackwood said with certainty. "My husband says Colonel Hammond has plans to settle the Indian problem once and for all." Sarah looked up sharply. "What kind of plans?" Mrs. Blackwood seemed pleased to have Sarah's attention after hours of chilly silence. "I shouldn't say too much, but Mr. Blackwood met with the Colonel last month. They're developing new strategies to contain the hostiles." She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "More effective than just soldiers and guns, if you understand my meaning." Sarah did understand, and it made her blood run cold. New strategies, containment. These were the euphemisms of men like Hammond who viewed the native population as a problem to be solved rather than people to be treated with humanity. The coach hit a particularly deep rut, jolting everyone from their seats momentarily. When they settled again, Wells was studying Sarah with new interest. "What takes you to Deadwood Dock?" he asked. The question caught Sarah off guard. "How did you—" "The medical bag," Wells nodded toward her lap. "Plus, I overheard the driver call you Doc when we boarded." Sarah hesitated. "I have a letter of introduction to Dr. Benjamin Parker in Deadwood. I'm hoping he might need assistance in his practice." "A female doctor?" Mrs. Blackwood looked scandalized. "How progressive." "Dr. Parker has quite the reputation," Wells said, ignoring Mrs. Blackwood. "Treats anyone who comes through his door, I hear. White, Indian, Chinese doesn't matter to him." "That's precisely why Sarah began, but her words were cut short by a sharp crack from outside, a sound she recognized instantly from her years in the field hospitals. Rifle fire. The driver shouted. Horses screamed. More shots followed in quick succession. Sarah lunged forward, pulling Wells down to the floor of the coach just as a bullet splintered through the wooden frame inches from his head. "Indians!" shrieked Mrs. Blackwood, clutching at the Reverend, who seemed frozen in terror. The coach swerved violently, and Sarah felt the sickening sensation of wheels leaving the ground. Time slowed as the world turned sideways. Her body went weightless for a moment before crashing against the side of the coach. Through the window, she saw sky, then trees, then sky again as the vehicle tumbled down the steep embankment. The last thing Sarah remembered was clutching her medical bag to her chest with one arm while trying to protect her unborn child with the other. Pain brought her back to consciousness. Sharp, insistent pain in her shoulder and a dull ache in her head. Sarah opened her eyes to darkness, momentarily panicking before realizing it was night. How long had she been unconscious? She was lying half-pinned beneath a section of the coach's frame. With effort, she worked herself free, taking inventory of her injuries with clinical detachment. Dislocated left shoulder, laceration on her forehead, bruised ribs. But her abdomen, she placed a hand there, holding her breath until she felt a reassuring flutter of movement within. "Thank God," she whispered. Around her lay the shattered remains of the stagecoach, scattered across a small clearing at the bottom of a ravine. In the faint moonlight, she could make out a still form nearby Reverend Hayward, his neck bent at an impossible angle. Dead without question. "Hello," she called softly. "Mrs. Blackwood, Mr. Wells." A groan answered her from a few yards away. Following the sound, she found Marcus Wells pinned beneath a heavy section of the coach. Blood soaked his shirt from a wound in his side, likely a broken rib had punctured something vital. "Doc," he rasped when he saw her. "You're alive." "Don't speak," Sarah said, automatically slipping into her physician's role despite her own injuries. "I need to check your wounds." "No time." Wells coughed, flecks of blood appearing on his lips, a very bad sign. "Listen to me. I'm not what I seem." Sarah paused in her examination. "What do you mean?" "Not a prospector, government man, investigating. Hammond." This made no sense to Sarah's concussed brain. "Colonel Hammond, why?" Experiments on Lakota prisoners. Wells's breathing became more labored. Biological weapons using disease. Sarah's blood ran cold. The tuberculosis outbreaks in the Lakota camps. The strange new variant she'd been seeing more virulent than any she'd encountered before. Are you saying Hammond is deliberately infecting the Lakota with disease? She asked, her voice barely audible. Wells nodded weakly. Testing effectiveness, but it's spreading. To white settlements too. Can't control it. He gripped her wrist with surprising strength. My notes, inside pocket. Take them. Find Parker. Sarah reached inside his coat and withdrew a small oilskin packet. As she did, another spasm of coughing overtook Wells and fresh blood bubbled from his mouth. Go, he gasped. Lakota who attacked. Still out there, looking for survivors. His eyes grew unfocused. Water, please. Sarah uncorked her canteen and held it to his lips, but before he could drink, his body went slack. She felt for a pulse, finding nothing. Grief would have to wait. If what Wells said was true, she needed to find shelter and safety not just for herself, but for the evidence he'd entrusted to her and the child she carried. Sarah forced her dislocated shoulder back into its socket using a nearby tree trunk, biting down on a stick to keep from screaming. The pain was blinding, but when it subsided, she had use of both arms again. She salvaged what she could from the wreckage, her medical bag thankfully intact. A blanket, the canteen, some hardtack from the driver's supplies. Of Mrs. Blackwood, she found no sign. The night was growing colder, and Sarah knew she couldn't remain at the crash site. Predators would be drawn to the bodies, and if Wells was right, the Lakota war party might return. She needed shelter water in a defensible position. For hours, she climbed through the darkness, following a game trail that wound upward along the rocky hillside. Her medical training told her this was foolishness. She was injured, pregnant, and alone in hostile territory. But survival instinct drove her forward. Near dawn, exhausted and in pain, Sarah stumbled upon what seemed like a miracle, a narrow opening in the granite cliff face partially hidden by a curtain of pine boughs. A cave. The entrance was barely wide enough for her to squeeze through, but inside the space opened into a larger chamber. What struck her immediately was the warmth. The cave was heated by some internal source, likely a hot spring. In the dim light filtering through the entrance, she could see that this was no ordinary cave. Bundles of dried plants hung from the ceiling. Clay pots and woven baskets lined natural shelves in the rock walls. A fire pit had been constructed near what appeared to be a natural chimney. Someone lived here. Someone with knowledge of plants and healing. Too exhausted to worry about the implications, Sarah collapsed onto a bed of soft furs near the back of the cave. Her last conscious thought was that she should remain vigilant, should prepare to defend herself. But her body had other ideas pulling her into the deep sleep of the utterly depleted. Sarah woke to the sensation of being watched. She kept her eyes closed, feigning continued sleep, while her other senses gathered information. The cave was warmer now, and she could smell wood smoke and herbs. Someone had built a fire. There was the soft sound of movement of items being shifted or arranged. Slowly, carefully, Sarah opened her eyes to narrow slits. A woman stood by the fire pit, her back to Sarah. She was tall and straight-backed, despite her apparent age, with long, gray-streaked black hair that hung in two braids down her back. She wore a simple buckskin dress adorned with intricate beadwork. As Sarah watched, the woman added something to a clay pot suspended over the small fire, then stirred it with a wooden spoon. The woman spoke without turning around, her voice deep and melodic. I know you are awake, Wasiku Winyan. White woman. Sarah opened her eyes fully and pushed herself into a sitting position, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. This is your home, she said, not a question. The woman turned then, and Sarah felt a shock of recognition. Though she had never met this woman before, she knew the face, or rather one very like it. The high cheekbones, the proud nose, the eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. This woman looked remarkably like Rain Crow, the healer who had been hanged at Fort Laramie. You are injured, the woman said, her English accented but clear, and with child. Sarah nodded instinctively, placing a hand over her abdomen. My name is Dr. Sarah Winters. Our stagecoach was attacked. I found your cave while seeking shelter. I am Evening Star, the woman replied. Wichapiti. This is my place of healing. She studied Sarah with penetrating dark eyes. You say you are a doctor, a healer among your people? Yes. Evening Star seemed to consider this, then gestured to the pot over the fire. I have made medicine for pain and to prevent the child from coming too early. Sarah hesitated. After what Wells had told her about Hammond's experiments, she had reason to be suspicious of anyone in these hills. Yet this woman had not harmed her while she slept, and as a physician, Sarah could recognize another healer. Thank you, she said finally. Evening Star brought a wooden cup filled with a steaming liquid that smelled of pine and something sharper, more medicinal. Drink. Sarah took a cautious sip. The taste was bitter, but not unpleasant, reminiscent of willow bark tea, but with other elements she couldn't identify. Your shoulder, Evening Star said, gesturing. I will bind it properly after you drink. As Sarah drank the medicine, she watched Evening Star move around the cave with practiced efficiency, selecting items from her stores. The cave was larger than she'd initially realized, extending back into several smaller chambers. Light came from both the entrance and several small openings high in the ceiling, creating shafts of dusty illumination that gave the space an almost sacred quality. The walls were decorated with paintings, not primitive scratches, but sophisticated images of plants, animals, and human figures engaged in what appeared to be healing ceremonies. Sarah recognized some of the plants from her own medical studies, Echinacea goldenseal yarrow. You're a medicine woman, Sarah said, a healer for your people. Evening Star paused in her preparations. I was. Now I heal those who find me. Few do. The attack on our coach was that your people, a shadow passed over Evening Star's face. Young warriors, angry ones. They see only enemies now. She shook her head. They do not follow the old always the ways of balance and respect. Sarah thought of Raincrow swinging from the gallows. Your people have reason to be angry. Evening Star's gaze sharpened. You understand this, a white doctor. I've seen injustices, Aussie, Sarah said carefully, uncertain how much to reveal. At Fort Laramie, a Lakota healer was executed for supposedly poisoning soldiers. But it wasn't true. They died of disease, not poison. Something flickered in Evening Star's eyes, recognition perhaps, or grief. When was this? 3 weeks ago. Her name was Raincrow. Evening Star turned away abruptly, but not before Sarah caught the pain that crossed her features. My sister, she said quietly. Raincrow was my sister. The revelation hung in the air between them. Sarah felt a chill despite the cave's warmth. Of all the caves in all the Black Hills, she had stumbled into the home of the sister of a woman whose unjust execution she had witnessed and done nothing to prevent. I examined the bodies, Sarah said, compelled by guilt to continue. I submitted a report stating they died of tuberculosis, not poison. The command ignored it. Evening Star was very still, her back to Sarah. Did you speak at her trial? Did you stand before all and tell this truth? Sarah's silence was answer enough. When Evening Star turned back, her face was composed once more, but her eyes held a new coldness. Finish your medicine, then I will tend your wounds. After that, you must go. Go where? Sarah asked. We're miles from any settlement, and there may still be warriors searching for survivors. That is not my concern, Wasiku Winyan. Evening Star selected a length of cloth and approached Sarah. Your people brought you to these hills. Your people must help you now. As Evening Star began binding Sarah's shoulder with practiced hands, Sarah knew she had to find a way to change the woman's mind. She would not survive long in the wilderness, not in her condition. I'm carrying something important, she said. Information about experiments being conducted on your people. Deliberate infection with disease. Evening Star's hands paused for just a moment before continuing their work. What experiments? Sarah reached for her medical bag, wincing as the movement pulled at her injured shoulder. From a hidden pocket, she withdrew the oilskin packet Wells had given her, along with her own notebook containing the tuberculosis treatment formula she'd been developing. A government agent was on our stagecoach. He was investigating Colonel Hammond for conducting biological weapons tests on Lakota prisoners, using a modified form of tuberculosis. Evening Star's face remained impassive, but her eyes were intent as Sarah opened the packet. Inside were several folded pages of notes and crude maps showing locations of outbreaks. Hammond is testing the disease's effectiveness as a weapon, Sarah continued. But according to these notes, it's mutated, become more virulent than they expected. It's spreading to white settlements too. And this concerns you because now your people die as well. There was a bitter edge to Evening Star's voice. It concerns me because I'm a doctor, Sarah replied with equal sharpness. I took an oath to do no harm and to treat all who need healing. She opened her notebook. I've been working on a treatment, a combination of traditional medicine and newer compounds. I think it could be effective against this variant. Evening Star took the notebook, her eyes widening slightly as she scanned the pages. Sarah had included detailed drawings of plants alongside chemical formulas and dosage calculations. This Evening Star pointed to a drawing of a rare mountain herb. Where did you learn of this? From medical journals. It's been used by native healers throughout the West for respiratory ailments. Combined with certain newer medicines, it could be more effective than either approach alone. Evening Star studied the formula for a long moment. Then with a decisive movement, she closed the notebook and handed it back to Sarah. You will stay, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument, until your shoulder heals. Then we will discuss this treatment. It wasn't quite acceptance, but it was a reprieve. Sarah nodded, relief washing through her. Evening Star finished binding the shoulder, her touch professional, but not gentle. Rest now. The medicine will make you sleep. She stood and moved toward the cave entrance. When you wake, we will talk more of these experiments and your formula. As the medicine began to take effect, Sarah's thoughts grew fuzzy. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Evening Star slip out of the cave. Despite the woman's apparent hostility, Sarah felt an odd sense of security. She had found another healer in this wilderness, one who might be willing to help her stop Hammond's experiments and develop a treatment for the disease ravaging both their peoples. She drifted into sleep with one hand resting protectively over her unborn child and the other clutching her notebook of formulas. For the first time since leaving Fort Laramie, Sarah felt a small spark of hope. Gunima. Dreams came as they always did, vivid and terrible. She was back in the field hospital outside Petersburg, 1865. The final days of the war. Wounded men packed every available space, their groans forming a constant backdrop to the surgeon's work. Sarah moved among them, barely 20 years old then, an experienced nurse despite her youth. In the dream as in memory, a soldier grabbed her wrist as she passed. His face was gaunt, eyes bright with fever. They're dying in the quarantine tent, he rasped. All of them. The quarantine tent housed prisoners of war with infectious diseases, men too sick to be moved to proper prisoner camps. By unspoken agreement, it received minimal attention from the overworked medical staff. Sarah should have nodded and moved on. Instead, she went to look. The tent stank of death and neglect. 24 men lay on pallets, most in the advanced stages of tuberculosis. But what seized Sarah's attention was the single black man moving among them, a prisoner himself, judging by his ragged uniform, but clearly acting as a caretaker to the others. Who are you? She asked. He straightened, revealing himself to be tall despite his emaciated frame. Solomon Washington, ma'am, 54th Massachusetts. A black soldier in a Union uniform caring for Confederate prisoners. The war had created stranger situations, she supposed. You're treating these men. Trying to, ma'am. Learned some from my grandmother. She was a healer back in South Carolina. He hesitated. I know it ain't proper medicine, but show me, Sarah said. Washington led her to a makeshift table where he had arranged various plants and roots. He explained each one how they were prepared, what ailments they treated. Sarah recognized some from her medical training, others were completely new to her. This one, he pointed to a dark root, helps with the coughing, clears the lungs. Sarah was fascinated. Some of these treatments made scientific sense based on her knowledge of medicine. Others seemed implausible, yet the men under Washington's care appeared to be suffering less than those in the main hospital with similar conditions. I'd like to learn more, she told him. Perhaps there are elements of your grandmother's methods that could help our patients. Washington's face lit up. I'd be honored to teach what I know, ma'am. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah visited the quarantine tent daily, learning Washington's techniques and bringing what supplies she could spare. Together, they developed treatments that combined his traditional knowledge with her medical training. Men who should have died began to improve. Then came the day everything changed. Sarah arrived at the tent to find a new officer in charge of the prisoner section, a captain named William Hammond, ambitious and coldly efficient. He was standing over one of the pallets, observing a prisoner in the throes of a coughing fit. What's going on here? He demanded when he saw Sarah enter with her basket of supplies. Medical treatment, sir, she answered, trying to keep her voice steady. Hammond's eyes narrowed. These are prisoners, nurse. They receive basic care only. With respect, sir, we've developed treatments that are showing real promise against tuberculosis. If you'd like to see our results. We, Hammond interrupted. Who is we? Before Sarah could answer, Solomon Washington emerged from the back of the tent. Hammond's face darkened. A Negro prisoner treating Confederate soldiers, this is completely unacceptable. Mr. Washington has valuable knowledge of herbal remedies that... Enough, Hammond cut her off. This prisoner will be removed immediately and disciplined for practicing medicine without authority. You, nurse, will report to your superiors for reassignment. Sir, please. That's an order, nurse. Disobey it and you'll face charges yourself. Sarah had no choice but to leave. The next day, she learned that Washington had been sent to a labor detail and the quarantine tent had been placed under strict supervision. All unauthorized treatments were discontinued. A week later, the war ended. In the chaos of demobilization, Sarah lost track of Solomon Washington, but she kept her notes on the treatments they had developed together. Years later, she would hear that Captain Hammond, now Colonel Hammond, had made a name for himself studying disease control in frontier outposts. The dream shifted as dreams do, and suddenly Sarah was no longer at Petersburg, but at Fort Laramie. She was watching Rain Crow hang, but when she looked more closely, it was Solomon Washington's face above the noose, his eyes accusing her of the same silence, the same complicity. You knew, he said, though his neck was broken. You knew and you said nothing. Sarah woke with a gasp, her heart pounding. The cave was dark except for the faint glow of embers in the fire pit. She was alone. No, not quite alone. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, she made out a figure sitting cross-legged near the cave entrance, silhouetted against the night sky, an evening star. The Lakota woman spoke without turning. You cry out in your sleep, Wasiku Winyan. Names, places. You say, I'm sorry, many times. Sarah struggled to sit up, her shoulder protesting the movement. Bad dreams. Not dreams. Memories. Evening Star rose and came to sit beside Sarah's pallet. In the dim light, her face was all angles and shadows. What do you remember that brings such pain? Sarah hesitated. These were not memories she shared, not even with colleagues. But something about this place, this woman, seemed to demand truth. I was a nurse during the war between the states, she began slowly. I saw many terrible things, but one incident haunts me more than others. She told Evening Star about Solomon Washington, about the treatments they had developed, and about Hammond's intervention. As she spoke, Evening Star's expression remained unreadable, but her attention never wavered. After the war, I used what I'd learned from Washington to continue my studies, Sarah concluded. Some of the treatments in my notebook come from his knowledge. And this man Hammond who stopped the healing, he is the same who now experiments on my people. Sarah nodded. The same. He's risen in rank and influence since then. He has the ear of generals and politicians. Evening Star was silent for a long moment. Then, you carry much guilt, Wasiku Winyan, for this Washington, for my sister, for others perhaps. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. Yes. Guilt that does not lead to action is useless. Evening Star's voice was neither kind nor cruel, simply matter of fact. It feeds only itself, growing fat while you grow thin. The words struck Sarah with unexpected force. How many years had she carried this guilt without truly acting on it? She had continued her medical studies. Yes, worked on treatments, but always within the safe confines of approved channels, never challenging the system that had allowed these injustices. What would you have me do? She asked, surprising herself with the question. Evening Star rose and moved to one of the baskets along the wall. She returned with a small pouch which she handed to Sarah. First heal yourself and the child you carry. Then we will speak of actions. Sarah opened the pouch to find a mixture of dried herbs and roots, some familiar, others unknown to her. What is this? For strength, for sleep without dreams. Evening Star returned to her position by the cave entrance. Rest now, tomorrow you will tell me more of Hammond's experiments in this disease he spreads. As Evening Star resumed her silent vigil, Sarah lay back on the pallet, the pouch of herbs clutched in her hand. The Lakota healer had offered her something unexpected, not forgiveness, which she had no right to grant, but a path forward, a chance to transform guilt into action. For the first time in years, Sarah felt the weight on her conscience shift slightly, becoming something else, resolve. Dawn broke over the black hills, painting the granite peaks in shades of rose and gold. Sarah stood at the cave entrance, breathing deeply despite the pain in her ribs. After 3 days of rest and Evening Star's treatments, she was regaining her strength. The cave was positioned high on the mountainside, offering a commanding view of the valley below. Pine forests stretched into the distance, broken occasionally by meadows and rocky outcroppings. In the far distance, Sarah could just make out a thin column of smoke rising from what might be a settlement or military outpost. Behind her, Evening Star was grinding herbs with a stone mortar and pestle, the rhythmic sound providing a counterpoint to the morning birdsong. Your medicine is effective, Sarah said, turning back to the cave. My shoulder has improved considerably. Evening Star acknowledged this with a slight nod, not pausing in her work. Over the past days, a cautious routine had developed between them. Evening Star would leave at dawn to gather plants or hunt, returning with food and fresh materials. Sarah would rest, study the healer's methods, and add to her own notes. They spoke little, but what conversations they had were increasingly focused on Hammond's experiments and the disease spreading through both communities. I've been thinking about the treatment formula, Sarah said, moving to sit near the fire pit. If we could combine my knowledge of newer medicines with your traditional remedies, we might create something more effective than either approach alone. Evening Star stopped grinding and looked up. You would share your Wasiku medicine with me. Why? Because people are dying, your people and mine. And because, Sarah hesitated, then pressed on. Because I've remained silent too many times. I won't do so again. Evening Star studied her for a long moment, then reached for a wooden box tucked behind one of the larger baskets. From it, she withdrew several folded papers, not the crude handmade paper Sarah had expected, but proper medical parchment. I too have studied your medicine, Evening Star said, unfolding the papers to reveal diagrams of human anatomy and notes written in a precise hand. Many summers ago, a Wasiku doctor taught me. Sarah examined the papers with growing astonishment. They were legitimate medical diagrams, annotated with both English terms and what she assumed were Lakota translations. These are professional materials. Who gave them to you? Evening Star's expression remained carefully neutral. A doctor who came to study our healing ways. We shared knowledge. There was something in her tone that suggested a deeper connection, but Sarah didn't press. Instead, she focused on the annotated diagrams. These are excellent teaching materials. Did you continue your studies after he left? When possible. Books are rare in these hills. Evening Star began wrapping the ground herbs in small cloth packages. Now tell me more of this disease Hammond spreads. How does it differ from the lung sickness we have known before? Sarah retrieved Wells's notes from her medical bag. According to these observations, the new variant progresses much faster than typical tuberculosis. Patients develop symptoms within weeks of exposure rather than months. The coughing is more severe with greater hemorrhaging in the lungs. Evening Star nodded grimly. I have seen this. 3 moons ago, a family came seeking help. The sickness had already taken the parents. The children. She trailed off, her hands stilling on the herbs. I could not save them. The agent Wells believed Hammond has been modifying the bacterium, somehow making it more virulent for use as a weapon. Sarah spread the notes on the ground between them. But it's escaped his control, spreading beyond the test subjects. How does one make a sickness stronger? Evening Star asked, her brow furrowed. There are methods cultivating the bacteria under specific conditions, selecting for more aggressive strains. Sarah hesitated. It's forbidden knowledge using medicine to create weapons. Not forbidden enough, it seems. Evening Star rose abruptly and moved to the cave entrance, staring out at the valley below. After a moment, she spoke without turning. When Raincrow was taken by your soldiers, she was carrying medicines to our people suffering from this sickness. They accused her of spreading disease, not curing it. Sarah felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. Then her execution wasn't just about those 2 soldiers. It was about silencing someone who might expose what Hammond was doing. Perhaps, Evening Star turned back, her face composed once more. Now you carry the same knowledge. The same danger follows you. The implication was clear. What had happened to Raincrow could happen to Sarah as well. All the more reason to complete this treatment formula, Sarah said. If we can prove its effectiveness, demonstrate that the disease can be cured rather than weaponized, it would undermine Hammond's entire project. Evening Star considered this, then nodded slowly. What do you need to continue your work? Access to my full notes, laboratory equipment, certain medicines I don't have with me. Sarah gestured at her limited supplies. And most importantly, a rare herb that grows only in high mountain meadows. I've included it in my formula based on medical literature, but I've never actually worked with it. Wakazi Pajuda. Evening Star said, recognition lighting her eyes. The golden medicine. It grows in the sacred places where the earth's blood runs close to the surface. You know it. I know where it grows. Few others do now. Evening Star returned to her place by the fire. It is dangerous to gather. The places are watched by both my people and yours. We need it, Sarah insisted. According to my calculations, it's a crucial component of the treatment. Evening Star was silent for a long moment, seemingly lost in thought. Finally, she spoke. There is a place 3 days' journey from here, a hidden valley where Wakazi Pajuta grows in abundance. I have not been there in many seasons, but if it still grows, we could gather enough for your medicine. Hope surged in Sarah's chest. You would take me there. Not yet. You are not strong enough for such a journey, and the child you carry would be at risk. Evening Star gestured to Sarah's swollen abdomen. For now, we will work with what we have. Prepare the other components of your treatment. When the time is right, I will decide about the golden medicine. It wasn't the answer Sarah had hoped for, but it was a start. Thank you, she said simply. Evening Star acknowledged this with a slight inclination of her head. Then in a shift of tone, your child moves strongly. It will be born when the leaves begin to fall. Sarah placed a hand on her abdomen, feeling the familiar flutter of movement. Yes, another 3 or 4 months, I think. The father he is this Reed who wanted to solve your predicament. Sarah tensed. Yes, how did you know his name? You speak in your sleep, Evening Star said matter-of-factly. You say many names, many places. Her dark eyes held Sarah's. You say Thomas please very often. Heat rose in Sarah's cheeks, embarrassment, anger, grief. All the emotions she tried to keep contained since leaving Fort Laramie. Dr. Reed is the medical director at Fort Laramie, she said stiffly. We worked together for nearly 2 years. He encouraged my research, supported my application to medical school when few others would. He said we shared a vision for frontier medicine. Her voice turned bitter. What he didn't share was that he had a wife and children back east. Men often have divided hearts, Evening Star observed. It does not excuse betrayal. No, it doesn't. Sarah squared her shoulders. But that's in the past. My focus now is on stopping Hammond and developing this treatment. Evening Star studied her for a moment longer, then nodded as if satisfied with what she saw. Good. Anger can be useful if directed properly. She rose and began gathering supplies into a small pack. I must go to check my traps and gather more herbs. Rest. Continue your notes. We will speak more when I return. After Evening Star had gone, Sarah sat alone by the fire, her hands resting on her abdomen where her child grew. Despite everything, her disgrace, the stagecoach attack, her uncertain future, she felt a strange sense of purpose taking root. Here in this hidden cave with an unlikely ally, she might finally do something that mattered. Something that might begin to balance the scales for all the time she had remained silent. She opened her notebook and began to write. The first test subject arrived unexpectedly 5 days later. Sarah was alone in the cave, sorting through the medicinal plants Evening Star had taught her to identify. She had organized them by properties, those for fever, for pain, for inflammation, for respiratory ailments, and was making detailed notes in her journal. A sound at the cave entrance made her look up sharply. Evening Star was not due back until evening. She had gone to check a series of more distant traps. Sarah reached for the knife Evening Star had given her for protection, rising to her feet with a silent prayer that her still healing shoulder would not fail her if she needed to defend herself. Unsai, grandmother, a young voice called from outside. Are you there? A child's voice speaking Lakota. Sarah hesitated, uncertain how to respond. If she revealed herself, a white woman, would the child flee? Or worse, would adults accompanying the child see her as a threat? Before she could decide, a small figure appeared in the cave entrance. A boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. He was thin to the point of emaciation, his face flushed with fever, his breathing labored. Blood flecked the corner of his mouth. Unchit, he called again, squinting into the dimness of the cave. The physician in Sarah overrode all other considerations. She set down the knife and moved toward the child, speaking softly. Your grandmother isn't here right now. I'm Dr. Winters. I can help you. The boy's eyes widened in fear at the sight of a white woman, and he took a stumbling step backward. Wait, Sarah said, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. Are you sick? I'm a healer like your grandmother. The boy swayed on his feet, clearly fighting to remain conscious. Whatever fear he felt was overwhelmed by his physical condition. He coughed violently, more blood appearing on his lips, then collapsed to his knees. Sarah rushed forward, catching him before he could fall face first onto the stone floor. His body burned with fever, and she could hear the wet rattle in his lungs with each labored breath. Classic symptoms of advanced tuberculosis, the same accelerated variant she had documented at Fort Laramie. She carried him to her own pallet, laying him down gently. His eyes fluttered open, glazed with fever and fear. What's your name? Sarah asked, reaching for her medical bag. The boy didn't respond either, not understanding English or too ill to process the question. Sarah dampened the cloth and placed it on his forehead, then began a thorough examination. His pulse was rapid and weak, his breathing shallow and gurgling. When she listened to his chest with her stethoscope, she could hear fluid filling his lungs. Without treatment, he wouldn't survive more than a day or two. Working quickly, Sarah prepared a mixture of willow bark for the fever and one of Evening Star's herbal preparations for respiratory distress. She helped the boy drink, supporting his head and speaking soothingly, though she knew he couldn't understand her words. She had just settled him back onto the pallet when voices sounded outside the cave, an adult voices urgent and worried. A moment later, an elderly Lakota woman appeared at the entrance, followed by a younger man whose hand rested on the knife at his belt. The woman cried out when she saw the boy lying on the pallet, rushing forward despite the man's attempt to hold her back. She knelt beside the child, speaking rapidly in Lakota, her weathered hands touching his face with desperate tenderness. The man remained at the entrance, his posture tense, eyes fixed on Sarah with undisguised hostility. He said something to the older woman, his tone questioning. The woman responded without looking up from the boy, gesturing towards Sarah and then to the medicines visible on the nearby stone shelf. The man's expression remained suspicious, but he didn't advance further into the cave. Sarah spoke slowly, hoping one of them understood English. The boy is very ill, tuberculosis, lung sickness. I've given him medicine for the fever and to help his breathing, but he needs more treatment. The elderly woman looked up at Sarah, her dark eyes swimming with tears. Swift Elk, she said, placing a hand on the boy's chest. My grandson. You speak English, Sarah said, relieved. Some, the woman acknowledged. Trading post. She studied Sarah with newfound intensity. You are Wasiku doctor, why here in Evening Star's place? I was injured. Evening Star's helping me heal. Sarah knelt beside the pallet, checking the boy's pulse again. She will return by nightfall. Until then, I can help care for Swift Elk. The woman exchanged words with the man at the entrance. He responded sharply, gesturing at Sarah with obvious distrust. The woman replied with equal force, and after a moment, the man's shoulders slumped slightly in resignation. My son does not trust Wasiku medicine, the woman explained, turning back to Sarah. Too many broken promises, too many deaths. I understand, Sarah said quietly, but I promise you I want only to help your grandson. This sickness, I've been studying it, working on a treatment. The woman, Swift Elk's grandmother, regarded Sarah for a long moment as if weighing her soul. Finally, she nodded. I am Speckled Fawn. My son is Black Fox. We came seeking Evening Star's healing for Swift Elk. The boy is very sick, Sarah said, not wanting to give false hope. The disease is advanced, but we'll do everything possible for him. Speckled Fawn nodded gravely. I have seen this sickness take many. It moves faster now, strikes harder. She looked down at her grandson. 3 days ago he was running, playing. Now he cannot stand. This confirmed what Sarah had read in Wells's notes, the accelerated progression of Hammond's modified strain. Has anyone in your community recovered from this illness? Few. The old medicine does not work against this new sickness. Speckled Fawn's eyes held Sarah's. That is why we came to Evening Star. She knows both old ways and new. Sarah felt a surge of determination. Here was exactly the kind of case her experimental treatment was designed for. If she could save this boy, it would not only validate her formula, but also demonstrate to the Lakota that effective treatment was possible. I need to prepare more medicine, she said, rising, and we should make him more comfortable. For the next several hours, Sarah and Speckled Fawn worked together to care for Swift Elk. Black Fox remained at the cave entrance, a silent sentinel, watching their every move with wary eyes. Occasionally, he would exchange words with his mother, but he made no attempt to speak to Sarah directly. By mid-afternoon, Swift Elk's fever had risen dangerously high. He thrashed on the pallet, caught in fevered hallucinations, coughing up increasing amounts of blood. Sarah had used every remedy at her disposal, but nothing was bringing the fever down or easing the fluid in his lungs. He's drowning, she explained to Speckled Fawn. The infection is causing fluid to fill his lungs. The older woman's face was creased with worry. What can be done? Sarah hesitated. What she was considering was risky, especially in these primitive conditions. There's a procedure, thoracentesis. It involves inserting a hollow needle between the ribs to drain the fluid. Speckled Fawn's eyes widened. You would put a needle into his chest. It's his best chance, Sarah said honestly. But I would need your permission and I would need help. Before Speckled Fawn could respond, Black Fox stepped forward, speaking rapidly in Lakota. His tone was angry, his gestures animated as he pointed from Sarah to his son. Speckled Fawn replied with equal intensity. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but the meaning was clear: a mother bear defending her cub's last chance at survival. Finally, Black Fox fell silent, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. Speckled Fawn turned back to Sarah. My son says this is Wasiku medicine that brings more harm than healing. She took a deep breath. I say my grandson dies before my eyes. If your needle can save him, use it. Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the woman's trust. I'll prepare everything. The procedure isn't pleasant to watch. Your son may wish to wait outside. Black Fox understood enough English to respond himself. I stay, he said firmly. Watch what you do to my son. Very well. Sarah began gathering her surgical instruments from her medical bag. I'll need clean water boiled and all the lamps you can find. I need to see clearly. As they prepared, Sarah felt the familiar calm of professional focus settling over her. This was what she had trained for, to make difficult decisions in challenging conditions, to use her skills to save lives regardless of the circumstances. She arranged her instruments on a clean cloth, scalpel, trocar, and cannula drainage tube suturing materials. Each was meticulously cleaned with alcohol from her medical supplies. I'll need you to hold him still, she instructed Speckled Fawn. The procedure is painful and he must not move once the needle is inserted. The elderly woman nodded, positioning herself at her grandson's head, her gnarled hands firm on his shoulders. Black Fox, after a moment's hesitation, moved to hold the boy's legs. Sarah located the proper position between Swift Elk's ribs, swabbed the area with alcohol, and took a deep breath. I'm going to begin. Hold him steady. With practiced precision, she made a small incision, then carefully inserted the trocar and cannula between the ribs. Swift Elk jerked awake, crying out in pain, despite his weakness. Speckled Fawn murmured soothing words in Lakota, holding him firmly but gently. When the cannula was properly positioned, Sarah withdrew the trocar and attached the drainage tube. Almost immediately, cloudy fluid began to flow through the tube into the basin she had prepared. It's working, she said, relief evident in her voice. The fluid is draining. Black Fox leaned forward, watching intently as the basin filled with bloody effusion from his son's lungs. Swift Elk's breathing, though still labored, already seemed less desperate. How much will come out? He asked, the first direct question he had addressed to Sarah. As much as needs to, she replied, monitoring the flow. We'll know it's enough when his breathing improves and the fluid runs clearer. For nearly an hour, they maintained their positions as the fluid drained. Swift Elk had fallen into an exhausted sleep, his face gradually losing some of its fevered flush. When the flow finally slowed to a trickle, Sarah carefully removed the cannula and sutured the small incision closed. Now we wait, she said, washing her hands in a basin of water. His body has been fighting this infection for days. He needs rest fluids and continued medication. Speckled Fawn stroked her grandson's forehead. He breathes easier already. The procedure has bought him time, Sarah cautioned, but the infection is still present. We need to continue treatment. As if on cue, a shadow fell across the cave entrance. Evening Star stood there, a string of rabbits in one hand, her gathering bag in the other. Her eyes took in the scene with one sweeping glance: Swift Elk on the pallet, the surgical instruments, the basin of drained fluid, the two Lakota visitors. How cola, Speckled Fawn said, rising to greet her old friend. Evening Star set down her burdens and embraced the older woman. They spoke rapidly in Lakota, Evening Star's expression growing increasingly grave as Speckled Fawn explained the situation. Finally, Evening Star turned to Sarah. You performed surgery here. Thoracentesis, Sarah confirmed. Swift Elk was drowning in his own fluids. It was necessary. Evening Star moved to examine the boy, her experienced hands gentle as she checked his breathing and the surgical site. After a moment, she nodded. You did well, Wasiku Winyon. The procedure was clean, the placement correct. Coming from Evening Star, this was high praise indeed. Sarah felt a warm glow of professional satisfaction, quickly tempered by the knowledge that they had only won the first skirmish in a longer battle. The infection is still present, she reiterated. He'll need continued treatment. Evening Star was already moving around the cave, selecting herbs and medicines from her stores. We will prepare the strong tea for lung sickness and the smoke treatment to clear the passages. For the remainder of the evening, the two healers worked side by side, combining their knowledge and techniques to treat the desperately ill boy. Sarah administered Western medicines from her supplies while Evening Star prepared traditional remedies. Together, they created a treatment regimen more comprehensive than either could have managed alone. Black Fox watched them work as initial hostility gradually giving way to cautious hope as his son's condition stabilized. By nightfall, Swift Elk was awake, able to take small sips of broth and medicine. As darkness fell outside the cave, Sarah found herself standing beside Evening Star. At the entrance, both women taking a moment's respite from their medical duties. The boy would have died without the needle procedure, Evening Star said quietly. Your Wasiku medicine saved him today. For now, Sarah replied, but your traditional treatments are what's fighting the infection. Without them, the fluid would simply return. Evening Star nodded, gazing out at the star-filled sky. Perhaps this is what the spirits intended when they brought you to my cave. Not one medicine or the other, but both together. Sarah felt a sudden, powerful connection to this woman who had been a stranger just days before. Two healers from different worlds united by a common purpose. I think you're right, she said softly. Evening Star was silent for a moment longer, then spoke with quiet intensity. Tomorrow we will begin preparing for the journey to gather Wakazi Pajuda, the golden medicine. Swift Elk's life may depend on it, and many others after him. Sarah's heart quickened. You've decided to take me there. Yes. Evening Star turned to face her, the starlight silvering her features. The time for caution is past. Hammond's disease spreads rapidly. We must act with equal speed. Thank you, Sarah said, knowing the words were inadequate for what this decision meant. I won't let you down. Evening Star's expression was solemn. See that you don't Wasiku Winyan. Many lives now depend on what we do in the days ahead. As they returned to their patient, Sarah felt a profound shift in her relationship with the Lakota healer. They were no longer reluctant allies, but partners in a mission with stakes higher than either had initially realized. The battle against Hammond's biological weapon had truly begun. Dawn broke over the Black Hills in streaks of amber and gold. Evening Star stood at the cave entrance, her face to the rising sun, arms outstretched in silent prayer. Behind her, Swift Elk slept peacefully, his breathing much improved after 3 days of combined treatment. Sarah sat nearby, grinding herbs with the stone mortar Evening Star had taught her to use. The journey will take 4 days, Evening Star said, turning back to the cave. 2 days to reach the sacred valley, 1 day to gather, 1 day to return. The way is difficult, not meant for those with child. Sarah set down the mortar. I can manage. The baby is strong, and so am I. Evening Star studied her for a long moment. Perhaps, but there is another concern. When we return, Swift Elk will need continued care. Someone must remain with him. His grandmother is too old for some of the treatments, and his father does not know our medicines. Evening Star's tone made it clear this was not a point for debate. One of us must stay. One must go. Sarah understood the logic, but frustration welled within her. You know the way to the valley. I don't. It must be you who goes. Yes, but I need your knowledge as well. Evening Star moved to a small wooden chest in the corner of the cave, withdrawing a folded piece of paper. Draw your formula, the exact measurements, the preparation method. With this, I can gather the correct amount of Wakazi Pajuda. It made sense, yet Sarah felt a strange reluctance. The formula represented years of work, her most significant contribution to medicine. To entrust it to someone else, even Evening Star, required a leap of faith. Evening Star seemed to read her thoughts. You have trusted me with your life, Wasiku Winyan. Can you not trust me with your medicine? Put that way, the answer was clear. Sarah took the paper and began to write, detailing the precise measurements and preparation methods she had developed. When finished, she handed it to Evening Star, who studied it carefully. The proportions are precise, Sarah explained. Too much of the golden medicine could be as dangerous as too little. Evening Star nodded. I understand. Our healing ways are also based on balance and proportion. She folded the paper and tucked it into a small deerskin pouch. I will leave at midday. The new moon will hide my passage through lands watched by Hammond's soldiers. How will you avoid the Lakota warriors? They're just as dangerous to you now, aren't they? A shadow passed over Evening Star's face. Yes, the young men who follow Standing Bear see me as a traitor for living apart, for learning Wasiku medicine. But I know paths they have forgotten, ways through the hills that even the oldest hunters no longer remember. Sarah wanted to ask more about Evening Star's past, about the doctor who had taught her Western medicine. But there was no time. Swift Elk was stirring, and there were preparations to make for Evening Star's journey. By midday, everything was ready. Evening Star had packed lightly a small bag of pemmican, a water skin, her gathering tools, and the precious formula. She stood at the cave entrance with Sarah making final preparations. If I do not return in 6 days, you must take Swift Elk and his family and seek shelter elsewhere. Evening Star said, her voice low so the others wouldn't hear. Hammond's men will eventually find this place. Sarah nodded, unwilling to voice the fear that Evening Star might not return at all. I'll continue the treatments for Swift Elk. His fever is down, but the infection remains. You have learned quickly, Wasiku Winyan. There was a hint of approval in Evening Star's voice. Perhaps you were meant to find my cave, despite all that divides our peoples. Before Sarah could respond, Speckled Fawn approached carrying a small bundle wrapped in tanned hide. She pressed it into Evening Star's hands, speaking softly in Lakota. Evening Star accepted the gift with formal dignity, then turned back to Sarah. Watch for signs of soldiers or warriors. Keep the fire small. Do not leave the cave except to gather water. She hesitated, then added, take care of them, and yourself. With that, she was gone, moving down the narrow path with the sure-footed grace of someone who had traveled these mountains for decades. Sarah watched until Evening Star disappeared among the pines, then turned back to the cave where her patient waited. The weight of responsibility settled over her for Swift Elk's life, for the success of their treatment, for all that would follow if they succeeded or failed. 3 days passed in a steady rhythm of treatment and observation. Swift Elk's condition improved gradually, his breathing easier, his fever reduced to occasional spikes rather than a constant burn. Sarah taught Speckled Fawn basic care techniques, while Black Fox ventured out daily to check for signs of soldiers or hostile warriors. On the morning of the 4th day, Sarah woke to an unfamiliar sound, Swift Elk's laughter. The boy was sitting up on his pallet, playing a string game with his grandmother. When he saw Sarah watching, he ducked his head shyly but offered a small smile. He asked for food this morning, Speckled Fawn said, her weathered face creased with joy. Real food, not just broth. It was the first promising sign that the treatments were working beyond merely keeping him alive. Sarah checked his lungs with her stethoscope, noting the significantly reduced congestion. The infection is retreating, she told Speckled Fawn. His body is winning the battle. As she prepared the morning medicines, Sarah reflected on how quickly circumstances had changed. 2 weeks ago, she had been a disgraced army doctor with nowhere to go. Now she was collaborating with a Lakota healer to develop a treatment that could save countless lives and perhaps expose Hammond's unethical experiments. A shadow fell across the cave entrance. Sarah looked up, expecting to see Black Fox returning from his morning patrol. Instead, a tall figure stood silhouetted against the daylight, a man in buckskins, neither white nor fully Lakota in appearance. His hair was black, but cut short in the white man's style, and he carried a military-issue rifle. "Don't be afraid," he said in perfect English, raising his empty hand. "I'm not here to harm anyone." Sarah reached for the knife at her belt, positioning herself between the stranger and Swift Elk. "Who are you? What do you want?" The man remained at the entrance, making no move to enter uninvited. "My name is Joseph Gray, though some call me Gray Wolf. I'm a scout for the army at Fort Laramie." His eyes moved past Sarah to where Speckled Fawn stood protectively over her grandson. He addressed her in Lakota, his tone respectful. Speckled Fawn responded cautiously, her expression guarded. Gray Wolf turned back to Sarah. "I've been tracking you since the Stagecoach attack, Dr. Winters. People at the fort are looking for you." Sarah tensed. "Hammond's people?" A flicker of surprise crossed Gray Wolf's features. "Yes. How did you know?" "It's a long story." Sarah kept the knife ready. "If you're working for Hammond, why are you telling me this instead of bringing soldiers to capture me?" "Because I don't work for Hammond, not really." Gray Wolf's expression hardened. "I scout for the army because it gives me access to information. Information my people need." "Your people?" Sarah studied him more closely, noting the high cheekbones, the proud nose features reminiscent of Evening Star. "You're Lakota." "Half. My father was a white doctor who came to study our healing ways." A shadow crossed his face. "He left before I was born." The pieces clicked into place. "You're Evening Star's son." Gray Wolf's surprise was evident. "You know my mother, how?" "This is her cave. I've been staying with her since the Stagecoach attack." Sarah lowered the knife slightly. "She's gone to gather a rare medicinal herb we need for a treatment formula." Gray Wolf entered the cave slowly, his posture non-threatening. He spoke again to Speckled Fawn, who replied with less hostility than before. "The old woman says you saved her grandson with white medicine, but are using my mother's treatments as well," he said to Sarah. "Is this true?" Yes, we're combining approaches to fight a particularly virulent form of tuberculosis. Sarah decided to take a risk. The same disease Hammond has been using in his experiments on Lakota prisoners. Grey Wolf's expression darkened. So you know about that too. A government agent named Wells was on the Stagecoach. He was investigating Hammond's biological weapons program. He died in the attack, but not before giving me his notes. Sarah gestured to her medical bag. I've been working on a treatment that could counteract the modified strain. Grey Wolf absorbed this information in silence, then moved to kneel beside Swift Elk. He examined the boy with a practiced eye, asking questions in Lakota that the child answered haltingly. You've done good work, he said, finally looking up at Sarah. The boy was near death when he arrived, I'd guess. He was. We performed a thoracentesis to drain fluid from his lungs, then started combined treatment with Western antibiotics and traditional remedies. Hammond is planning something bigger than just experiments, Grey Wolf said, abruptly rising to his feet. There's a major operation being prepared. Soldiers arriving, daily supplies stockpiled. The officers don't tell me much, but I overhear things. Sarah felt a chill. What kind of operation? A final solution to the Lakota problem in the Black Hills. Hammond has convinced his superiors that the gold in these hills is too valuable to leave in Indian hands. Grey Wolf's voice was flat. And with the modified disease spreading, he has the perfect excuse: containment of a dangerous epidemic. But the epidemic is his creation in the first place. Exactly. And now it's spreading beyond his control, affecting white settlements too. He needs to act quickly before his own weapon turns against him. Grey Wolf moved to the cave entrance, peering out as if expecting pursuit. There's more. The young warriors under Standing Bear are planning an attack on the fort. They know something is coming, and they want to strike first. When? At the next full moon, 7 days from now. He turned back to Sarah. If they attack, Hammond will have the justification he needs for a full-scale military response. Every Lakota camp within 100 miles will be targeted. Sarah struggled to process this information. A conflict that had been simmering for years was about to erupt into open warfare with biological weapons added to the conventional horrors of combat. We need to stop both sides, she said. If we can prove Hammond is using biological weapons, expose his experiments. Proof won't be enough, Grey Wolf interrupted. Hammond has powerful allies in Washington. They want the gold in these hills, and they don't care what happens to my mother's people. Then we need the treatment formula. If we can demonstrate an effective cure, it undermines the entire premise of Hammond's containment operation. Grey Wolf considered this. Perhaps, but you'd need to get that proof to someone with authority equal to Hammond's, and quickly. Wells mentioned a contact in Washington, someone he was reporting to. Sarah retrieved the oilskin packet from her medical bag. Here in his notes. Grey Wolf examined the papers, his expression growing more focused. Agent James Forrester, Department of the Interior. I know this name. He was at the fort 2 months ago asking questions about the medical facilities and prisoner treatment. Hammond had him escorted off the premises. Hope sparked in Sarah's chest. If we could get our treatment formula and evidence of Hammond's experiments to Forrester, it would still take weeks for him to act officially, Grey Wolf said. The attack will happen in 7 days. Silence fell over the cave as the enormity of their challenge sank in. Even if Evening Star returned with the golden medicine tomorrow, developing and testing the final formula would take time they didn't have. Swift Elk's weak voice broke the silence. He had been listening, understanding more English than Sarah had realized. He spoke to Grey Wolf in Lakota, gesturing with his thin hands. Grey Wolf listened intently, then smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from him. The boy says you should trust the medicine to work, that his spirit saw it healing others while he was in the fever dream. Sarah wasn't sure what to make of this, but she appreciated the child's faith. Tell him I do trust the medicine. It's just a matter of time, which we may not have enough of. Grey Wolf translated, and Swift Elk responded with surprising intensity for a child still recovering from a life-threatening illness. He says his father should take you to Standing Bear. Grey Wolf translated, looking troubled. That the great chief must hear your words before he attacks the fort. Black Fox, who had been silent since Grey Wolf's arrival, suddenly spoke up. A rapid exchange in Lakota followed with increasingly agitated gestures. What are they saying? Sarah asked. Black Fox thinks it's too dangerous to take a white woman to Standing Bear's camp, Grey Wolf explained. The young warriors would kill you before you could speak. Swift Elk believes the medicine you've given him would protect you, that Standing Bear would listen once he saw how you saved the boy. Could it work? Sarah asked. Would Standing Bear listen to evidence about Hammond's experiments? Grey Wolf's expression was grave. Standing Bear is a wise leader, but he's under pressure from the young warriors who want war. They've seen too many broken treaties, too many dead children. They believe there's no alternative left but to fight. There's always an alternative to war, Sarah said quietly, especially one they cannot win. Grey Wolf studied her for a long moment. You really believe your medicine can change things, don't you? I believe the truth can change things. Hammond is using disease as a weapon against civilians. That violates every principle of warfare, even by the Army's own standards. If we can prove it and offer a treatment at the same time, the scout nodded slowly. It would need to be handled carefully. Standing Bear's camp is 3 days' journey from here in the far hills. We would need to approach under specific circumstances to avoid being killed immediately. You would take me there? Sarah asked, surprised. Not me. I can't be seen with you or I'll lose my position at the fort and the information it provides. He glanced at Black Fox. But if he were willing and if my mother returns with the medicinal herb you need. Black Fox spoke again, questioning Grey Wolf in their shared language. He wants to know if this would truly save his people, Grey Wolf translated. If exposing Hammond's plans would stop the soldiers from coming. Sarah wished she could promise this, but honesty compelled her to be realistic. It might not stop them completely, but it would change the nature of the conflict. Hammond wants a quick, overwhelming victory with minimal outside scrutiny. Exposure would bring attention he doesn't want. After Grey Wolf translated, Black Fox fell silent, his expression troubled. Finally, he nodded once sharply. He will think on it, Grey Wolf said. But first my mother must return with the golden medicine. Without the treatment, to demonstrate words alone will not convince Standing Bear. How did you find us? Sarah asked the question that had been nagging at her since his arrival. A hint of a smile touched Grey Wolf's lips. I've known the location of my mother's cave since childhood. I visit when I can, though less often in recent years. His expression grew somber. Our paths diverged when I chose to work among the whites. She believes I betrayed our people's ways. Yet you're working to protect those same people now. The world is changing, Dr. Winters. The old ways are dying whether we wish it or not. I chose to learn the new ways to understand the Wasiku mind, to find a path that might allow some of our people to survive what's coming. He shrugged. My mother chose to preserve the old knowledge, to keep it alive for those who remain. Different paths to the same goal. Sarah thought of her own journey from army nurse to female physician in a world that barely tolerated such ambitions to her current unlikely alliance with a Lakota healer. Different paths indeed. Grey Wolf moved toward the entrance. I must return to the fort before my absence is noted. I'll come again in 2 days. If Evening Star has returned by then, we can decide on next steps. He paused. If Hammond's men find you before then, tell them you were taken captive after the Stagecoach attack. That you escaped. Nothing about my mother or the medicine. I understand. With a final nod to the others, Grey Wolf slipped out of the cave and disappeared into the forest as silently as he had come. Sarah sank down onto a rock, suddenly exhausted. The stakes had just risen dramatically. It wasn't just about developing a treatment anymore. It was about preventing a war, stopping a massacre, exposing a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the military. And all while protecting the child growing within her. Soon, Evening Star did not return on the 5th day nor on the 6th. Sarah tried to focus on Swift Elk's care, but anxiety gnawed at her. Had something happened to the Lakota healer? Had she been captured by Hammond's men, or by hostile warriors? Or was the journey simply taking longer than expected? On the morning of the 7th day, Black Fox announced he could wait no longer. He and Speckled Fawn needed to return to their village to warn the others of Hammond's plans with or without proof of the biological weapons. Swift Elk is strong enough to travel now, Sarah agreed, having examined the boy that morning. His lungs are much clearer, and the fever is gone. Black Fox spoke to her directly, which had become more common in recent days. You come too, he said in halting English. Not safe here alone. Sarah was touched by his concern, but shook her head. I must wait for Evening Star. She'll return with the medicine we need. After a lengthy discussion in Lakota between the 3 family members, Speckled Fawn approached Sarah. Swift Elk says he stay with you. Wait for Evening Star. He is strong enough now, and you saved his life. He will help protect you. Sarah was startled by the offer. That's very brave, but he's still recovering. He should be with his family. Speckled Fawn translated for Swift Elk, who responded with surprising firmness for a child his age. He says he had dream vision during fever. Speckled Fawn explained. Saw you standing between two worlds holding medicine that glowed like sun. Says spirits want him to stay help you finish medicine journey. Sarah didn't know what to make of this. She had no belief in spirit visions, yet she couldn't deny the conviction in Swift Elk's young face. And practically speaking, having someone who spoke Lakota might prove useful if Evening Star returned injured or unable to communicate. After further discussion, it was agreed. Black Fox and Speckled Fawn would return to their village with news of Hammond's plans, while Swift Elk would remain with Sarah until Evening Star returned. The parting was emotional, with Speckled Fawn embracing her grandson tightly and speaking words Sarah didn't need to understand to recognize as a grandmother's love and concern. Black Fox, too, showed a tenderness toward his son that belied his usually stoic demeanor. To Sarah's surprise, both adults treated her with formal respect before departing. Black Fox even placed his hand briefly on her shoulder, a gesture of acceptance she would not have thought possible days earlier. After they left, the cave seemed eerily quiet. Swift Elk sat near the entrance, watching the path his parents had taken. Despite his insistence on staying, Sarah could see the moment when childish uncertainty replaced bravery in his expression. They'll be safe, she said, sitting beside him. Your father is a skilled warrior, and your grandmother is very wise. Swift Elk glanced at her, then back to the forest. Father will warn Standing Bear, he said in careful English, surprising Sarah with his command of the language. But young warriors want fight, may not listen. You speak English very well, Sarah observed. The boy nodded. Grandmother teach. She traded fort before soldiers get bad. Sarah realized there was much about Swift Elk's family she didn't know. Has your grandmother always lived with your people? She seems to know a lot about the white world. She lived with Wasiku many years ago, when young. Swift Elk's face scrunched in concentration as he searched for the right words. She was helper to white woman with medicine. Learn English, learn reading. This explains Speckled Fawn's unexpected familiarity with Western ways. Like Evening Star, she had straddled both worlds, learning what she could from each. And you, Sarah asked, what do you think about the Wasiku, about people like me? Swift Elk considered this with a seriousness that seemed beyond his years. Some good, some bad, like Lakota. He shrugged. You good. You have strong medicine. Save me. From the mouths of children, Sarah thought. Such a simple perspective, yet wiser than most adults. Let's check your lungs again, she said, reaching for her stethoscope. Then we should prepare some food. We need to keep up your strength. The day passed slowly. Sarah kept Swift Elk occupied with small tasks, sorting herbs, fetching water from the spring at the back of the cave, practicing his English. She taught him the English names for various medicinal plants, while he taught her the Lakota equivalents. By nightfall, there was still no sign of Evening Star. Sarah built a small fire, careful to use dry wood that would produce minimal smoke, as Grey Wolf had advised. She and Swift Elk ate a simple meal of pemmican and wild onions, then settled in for the night. Tell story, Swift Elk requested as Sarah tucked a fur around his shoulders. What kind of story? About your medicine, how you learn. Sarah smiled. That's not a very exciting story for a boy your age. Swift Elk's expression remained serious. Want to know, maybe I be healer someday. Touched by his interest, Sarah settled beside him and began to tell a simplified version of her journey from Civil War nurse to physician. Swift Elk listened with rapt attention, asking surprisingly insightful questions about her training and experiences. So you help soldiers both sides? He asked when she mentioned treating Confederate prisoners. Yes, doctors and nurses are supposed to help anyone who needs healing, regardless of which side they're on. Sarah thought of Solomon Washington caring for enemy soldiers in the quarantine tent. That's what makes medicine different from war. In war, you choose sides. In healing, there are no sides, only people in need. Swift Elk nodded thoughtfully. Like Evening Star, she heal anyone who come. Lakota Wasiku doesn't matter. Exactly, that's why. A sound from outside interrupted her, a faint rustling that could have been the wind, except there was no wind that night. Sarah tensed, reaching for the knife Grey Wolf had left for her protection. Stay here, she whispered to Swift Elk. Be very quiet. She moved silently to the cave entrance, knife ready. The night was clear, the stars brilliant in the black sky. Nothing moved among the shadowy pines. Then she saw it, a darker shape among the shadows, moving slowly up the path toward the cave. The figure stumbled, caught itself, continued forward with obvious effort. Sarah held her breath, gripping the knife tighter. The figure emerged into the small clearing before the cave, and moonlight revealed Evening Star. She was hunched over, one arm clutched around her midsection, her clothing torn and stained dark with what could only be blood. Evening Star. Sarah rushed forward, supporting the older woman as she staggered the final few steps to the cave entrance. Inside, Evening Star gasped. Quickly. Once inside, Evening Star collapsed onto a pallet, her breathing labored. Swift Elk cried out in alarm, speaking rapidly in Lakota. The healer responded weakly, reaching out to touch the boy's face in reassurance. Sarah was already gathering medical supplies. What happened? Who did this to you? Hammond's soldiers, Evening Star said through gritted teeth. Patrolled near the Sacred Valley. They shot, but I escaped. She fumbled at her belt, withdrawing a small pouch. I found it, the golden medicine. Sarah took the pouch with reverence, knowing what Evening Star had risked and suffered to obtain it. Let me tend your wounds first. No time, Evening Star pushed herself up on one elbow. Must prepare, formula now. The soldiers follow. We'll find caves soon. Sarah wanted to argue, but the urgency in Evening Star's voice was undeniable. She helped the injured woman to a sitting position, then quickly examined her wounds. A bullet had grazed her side, leaving a deep furrow across her ribs. There were other injuries too, a gash on her arm, bruises on her face, suggesting she had fled through difficult terrain in her escape. Swift Elk, bring water in the small clay pot, Sarah instructed. To Evening Star, she said, I'll bandage these wounds while we prepare the formula. You've lost blood, you need to rest. Evening Star shook her head stubbornly. The formula first, then rest. For the next hour, they worked side by side despite Evening Star's injuries. The golden medicine, a rare flowering herb with roots the color of sunset, was prepared according to Sarah's formula, combined with other ingredients Evening Star had gathered. The cave filled with the pungent aroma of healing herbs and bubbling extracts. Swift Elk assisted them, following instructions precisely, his young face solemn with the importance of their work. He seemed to sense that this medicine represented more than just a treatment for his illness. It was a potential salvation for his people. As they worked, Evening Star described her journey in fragmented sentences. She had reached the Sacred Valley without incident, gathered the golden medicine, and was halfway back when she encountered the patrol. 6 soldiers, she said, wincing as Sarah cleaned the bullet wound. Led by man with cold eyes, officer. Hammond, no, younger, hard face, spoke of clearing the hills of vermin. Sarah tied off the bandage, her hands gentle but efficient. Did they know who you were, what you were carrying? They knew. I was Lakota. That was enough. Evening Star's voice was bitter. Shot without warning. I ran, hid in stream, traveled by night. With the formula prepared and Evening Star's wounds tended, Sarah helped the exhausted healer lie down. Rest now. The medicine needs to steep overnight before it's ready. Evening Star gripped Sarah's wrist with surprising strength. They will find this place soon. Must be ready to leave at dawn. We will be, Sarah promised. Sleep now. Regain your strength. As Evening Star drifted into exhausted slumber, Sarah moved to the cave entrance where Swift Elk sat watching the night. She sat beside him, placing a protective arm around his thin shoulders. Will she die? He asked in a small voice. No, Sarah said firmly. Her wounds are painful but not fatal. She's strong and she knows how to heal. They sat in silence for a while, the enormity of their situation weighing heavily in the night air. Hammond's men were searching the hills. The deadline for Standing Bear's attack was approaching, and now they had a wounded woman to protect along with a still recovering child. We need Grey Wolf, Sarah said finally. He'll know what to do, how to get us to safety. He'd come tomorrow, Swift Elk reminded her. He promised. Yes, but we may need to leave before then. Sarah gazed out at the starlit forest. If Hammond's men are close, we can't wait. Swift Elk was quiet for a moment, then said, I know other way. Down mountain. To hidden place where my people sometimes go. Father showed me. Sarah looked at him in surprise. You know a safe path, one the soldiers wouldn't know about. The boy nodded solemnly. Old path, from before Wasuku come. Very hidden. Hope stirred in Sarah's chest. If they could reach a Lakota encampment with the completed formula, they might still have a chance to prevent Standing Bear's attack and expose Hammond's plans. Good boy, she said, squeezing his shoulder gently. Tomorrow you'll show us this path, but now you should rest too. We'll need all our strength. After Swift Elk had settled onto his pallet, Sarah remained at the cave entrance, knife in hand, watching the dark forest for signs of pursuit. The precious formula simmered gently over the small fire, filling the cave with its medicinal scent. Her hand moved to her abdomen, feeling the strong movements of the child within. "We'll be all right," she whispered. "All of us." But as the night deepened, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just beginning. Wishao! Grey Wolf arrived before dawn, moving through the forest like a shadow. He entered the cave silently, his expression grim, when he saw Evening Star's injured form. "Hammond's men?" he asked, kneeling beside his mother. Sarah nodded. "A patrol near the Sacred Valley. 6 soldiers," she said, led by an officer with a hard face. "Captain Miller," Grey Wolf said with certainty. "Hammond's most loyal officer, known for his enthusiasm in dealing with the Lakota." He gently touched his mother's bandaged side. "The bullet, just a graze but deep. She's lost blood and is exhausted from the journey." Sarah gestured to the clay pot where the formula was still steeping. "But she got the golden medicine. The formula will be ready by midday." Grey Wolf's eyes widened slightly. "You have all the elements now. The treatment is complete." "It will be, but we need to test it, document its effectiveness. And we need to get this information to Agent Forrester." Sarah lowered her voice so Swift Elk wouldn't hear. "Evening Star believes Hammond's men will find this cave soon. We need to leave." "She's right. Miller is a skilled tracker, and he won't give up easily." Grey Wolf glanced at Swift Elk, who was repacking their few belongings as Sarah had instructed. The boy should not be traveling in his condition. "He's stronger than he looks, and he knows a hidden path down the mountain, to a place where his people sometimes gather." Grey Wolf looked skeptical. "What hidden path?" Swift Elk spoke up in Lakota, explaining to Grey Wolf with gestures and words. The scout listened intently, occasionally asking questions that the boy answered with growing confidence. Finally, Grey Wolf nodded. "He speaks of the Ghost River Trail. It follows an underground stream through a narrow canyon. Few remember it, now it hasn't been used regularly in a generation." He looked impressed. If his father showed him this path, it could indeed provide safe passage. Hope surged in Sarah's chest. "Then we can go take the formula to Standing Bear." "It's not that simple." Grey Wolf ran a hand through his short hair. "The camp Swift Elk knows is not Standing Bear's main encampment. It's a gathering place for families, elders, children. The warriors will be elsewhere preparing for the attack. But someone there could take us to Standing Bear." "Possibly. But you would be in great danger, Dr. Winters. Even with Swift Elk and my mother vouching for you, many Lakota would see only a white woman, and a pregnant one at that. The symbolism alone would be provocative." Before Sarah could respond, Evening Star spoke from her palate, her voice weak but determined. "She must go. The medicine must be tested. Proven." Grey Wolf moved to his mother's side, speaking to her softly in Lakota. Evening Star replied with surprising strength, gesturing towards Sarah and the simmering formula. "What is she saying?" Sarah asked. "That you have a pure heart, that you risked your life to develop this medicine for both peoples, that you must be protected." Grey Wolf's expression was complex respect mingled with a concern. "She believes the medicine will work, but only if you are the one to administer it." Sarah was touched by Evening Star's faith in her, but practical concerns remained. "I cannot travel quickly in my condition, and Evening Star is too weak to move far. How do we reach safety before Hammond's men find us?" Grey Wolf was silent for a moment, clearly weighing options. "There is a way," he said finally, "but it's dangerous for all of us." "Tell me." "I could report to Hammond that I've found evidence of Lakota families gathering near Ghost Canyon. He would send men to investigate, including Miller's patrol. That would draw them away from this area for at least a day, giving you time to travel by the hidden path." "But that would put innocent families in danger," Sarah protested. "No, there are no Lakota currently at that gathering place. It's used only at certain times of year. The soldiers would find an empty camp, but it would delay them." Grey Wolf's expression was grim. "The risk is to me. If Hammond ever discovered I gave false information, he would execute you as a traitor," Sarah finished. Grey Wolf nodded. "But it may be our only option. I can delay the patrols, then meet you at the gathering place tomorrow. From there we can seek out Standing Bear together." Evening Star struggled to sit up. "No," she said firmly. "Too dangerous for you, Mother. I will not lose another child to Hammond's evil." Evening Star's voice cracked with emotion. "First your father, then your sister. Not you too." Sarah was startled by this revelation. "Your sister?" Evening Star looked away, pain etched in the lines of her face. Raincrow, hanged at Fort Laramie for trying to heal soldiers. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Raincrow was your sister and Grey Wolf's aunt. Sarah recalled the execution she had witnessed, the report she had filed that was ignored. I saw it happen. I knew she was innocent. The soldiers died of tuberculosis, not poison. Hammond arranged it, Grey Wolf said quietly. When he learned she was treating infected soldiers with traditional remedies, he feared she would discover what he was doing. So he had her arrested, charged with murder. I submitted a medical report stating the men died of disease. The command ignored it. Sarah's voice was hollow with guilt. I should have spoken up at the trial. Should have challenged the findings publicly. It would have made no difference, Grey Wolf said. Hammond had already decided her fate. Speaking out would only have meant your own career ended sooner. But at least I would have tried. Sarah met Evening Star's gaze. I'm sorry I failed your sister. I won't fail you or your son. Evening Star studied her for a long moment, then nodded once acknowledgement, if not quite forgiveness. The past is done. Now we must think of the future. She turned to Grey Wolf. Your plan is good, but there is another way. The soldiers seek a Lakota woman, not a white doctor. Let Sarah go openly to Fort Laramie. What? Sarah and Grey Wolf spoke simultaneously. She claims to have escaped captivity after the Stagecoach attack. Returns with story of Lakota savages. Hammond will welcome her, a witness to justify his plans. Evening Star's eyes gleamed with strategic intelligence. Meanwhile, Swift Elk and I take medicine by hidden path. Meet Lakota families. Begin testing. That's too dangerous, Sarah protested. You're injured and Hammond might recognize me as a threat once he learns my name. Wells's notes indicate I was specifically being watched because of my tuberculosis research. Perhaps, Grey Wolf said slowly, but the idea has merit. Not you going to the fort, but creating a diversion of some kind. Something to draw the patrols away from your escape route. Swift Elk, who had been listening intently, suddenly spoke up. In rapid Lakota, he described something to Grey Wolf using animated gestures. Grey Wolf listened, then laughed a short surprise sound. The boy has an idea. A good one, actually. He translated for Sarah. He suggests we create false trails leading away from the hidden path. Many false trails. I leave footprints, campfire, remain signs of injured people traveling east while you actually go west. Would that work? Sarah asked. It might. Miller is a good tracker, but he's also arrogant. If he finds what appears to be obvious signs of flight, he'll follow them without questioning too deeply. Grey Wolf looked at Swift Elk with new respect. The boy thinks like a hunter. Swift Elk grinned, proud of his contribution. With renewed purpose, they formulated a plan. Grey Wolf would create false trails leading east with clear signs of 3 people traveling in haste. Meanwhile, Sarah, Evening Star, and Swift Elk would take the Ghost River Trail west, carrying the precious formula to the gathering place where Grey Wolf would meet them the following day. As midday approached, the formula was finally ready, a dark aromatic liquid that Evening Star carefully strained into a series of small clay bottles, sealing each with beeswax. This is the full treatment, she explained to Sarah. 5 days of medicine taken morning and night. For someone already sick like Swift Elk was, it will stop the disease and begin healing. For those not yet ill, it will prevent sickness even after exposure. Sarah was professionally impressed by the precise measurements and careful preparation. We should document the formula, make sure it can be reproduced if something happens to us. Grey Wolf provided paper from his scouting pack, and Sarah wrote out the complete formula, including both Evening Star's traditional components and her own Western medicines. She made 3 copies, one for herself, one for Evening Star, and one for Grey Wolf to carry separately. If Hammond's men capture you, Grey Wolf warned, they must not find this. The formula could be used to create a more effective weapon, not just a treatment. Sarah tucked her copy into a hidden pocket sewn into her skirt. I understand. By early afternoon, they were ready to depart. Grey Wolf would leave first, creating the false trails to the east. 2 hours later, Sarah's group would take the hidden path west. They would rendezvous the following evening at the gathering place Swift Elk knew. As Grey Wolf prepared to leave, he embraced his mother awkwardly, the gesture of a man unused to displaying affection. Be careful, my son, Evening Star said softly. You walk a dangerous path between 2 worlds. As do you, mother. Grey Wolf turned to Sarah. Protect her. She is more important than she knows. I will, Sarah promised, with my life if necessary. Grey Wolf nodded, then knelt before Swift Elk, speaking to him in Lakota. The boy responded with solemn dignity, squaring his thin shoulders. "I've told him he's the man of the group now," Grey Wolf explained to Sarah, "responsible for guiding you safely to the gathering place. He takes this very seriously. As he should. We wouldn't have the formula without his courage in staying with us." With final instructions exchanged, Grey Wolf departed, moving through the forest with the silent grace of his namesake. Sarah watched until he disappeared among the trees, then turned back to their preparations. 2 hours, she said to Evening Star and Swift Elk. Then we leave this place behind. Evening Star nodded, her face drawn with pain, but her eyes clear and determined. Yes, the journey continues for all of us. The Ghost River Trail lived up to its name. Swift Elk led them to what appeared to be a solid rock face covered with vines and brush. But when the vegetation was pushed aside, a narrow fissure was revealed just wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately. The sound of running water echoed from somewhere below, and a faint path was visible in the dim light filtering through occasional cracks in the canyon ceiling. "Stay close," Swift Elk instructed, his young voice surprisingly authoritative in the enclosed space. "Follow exactly. Many side paths lead nowhere." Sarah helped Evening Star navigate the difficult terrain, concerned about the older woman's injuries. Evening Star moved slowly but steadily, her face set in lines of determination that allowed no complaint about pain. The path descended steadily, following the underground stream that Swift Elk called the Ghost River. In places, the canyon widened enough for them to walk comfortably side by side. In others, they had to proceed single file along narrow ledges, with the stream gurgling below. "How much farther?" Sarah asked after they had been traveling for what felt like hours. Her back ached from the weight of her pregnancy, and she worried about Evening Star, whose bandages were showing fresh spots of blood from the exertion. "Not far now," Swift Elk assured her. "Soon path goes up out of canyon, then short walk to gathering place." As if on cue, the path began to ascend, moving away from the stream toward what appeared to be a dead end. But Swift Elk confidently led them to another concealed opening, this one requiring them to crawl on hands and knees for several yards before emerging into daylight. They found themselves in a small, sheltered valley surrounded by pine-covered hills. A clear spring bubbled from rocks nearby, and the remains of old fire pits were visible in a central clearing. "Gathering place," Swift Elk announced proudly. "Safe here. No Wasakyu ever find." Sarah helped Evening Star settle onto a fallen log, then examined her wounds. The bandages needed changing, and the older woman was clearly exhausted, though she would never admit it. "We'll rest here," Sarah decided. "Grey Wolf won't arrive until tomorrow evening at the earliest. We should conserve our strength and tend to Evening Star's injuries." Swift Elk nodded immediately, setting about gathering firewood and fresh water, as if he had done this many times before. Sarah suspected that despite his youth, he had indeed accompanied his family to this place, often learning the skills needed for survival in the wilderness. As evening approached, they had established a small camp. A fire burned low in one of the old pits, carefully fed with dry wood that produced minimal smoke. Evening Star rested on a bed of pine boughs, her wounds cleaned and rebandaged. The precious bottles of medicine were safely stored in Sarah's medical bag. Swift Elk insisted on taking the first watch, positioning himself on a rock outcropping that offered a view of the approaches to the valley. Sarah didn't argue. The boy had proven himself remarkably capable, and they all needed to contribute what they could to their collective survival. Sitting beside Evening Star as twilight deepened into night, Sarah found herself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. A month ago, she had been an army doctor with a promising career, despite the challenges of being a woman in a male-dominated profession. Now she was a fugitive in the wilderness, pregnant, allied with a Lakota healer, carrying a formula that might save hundreds of lives or make her a target for those who would use disease as a weapon. "You think too much, Wasiku Winyan." Evening Star observed, her voice weak, but her eyes sharp as ever. "I can hear your thoughts spinning like a windmill." Sarah smiled faintly. "There's much to think about." "Yes, but thinking alone does not change the world. Action does." Evening Star shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at her wound. "You acted when you saved Swift Elk. When you helped develop the formula, this is good. It doesn't feel like enough. Hammond is still preparing his operation. Standing Bear still plans to attack. We're 3 people, an injured healer, a pregnant doctor, and a child against forces much larger than ourselves. Sometimes small things change the course of rivers." Evening Star's gaze was distant, seeing beyond their small camp. "One stone placed at the right moment can divert the flow, change what seems inevitable." Sarah wanted to believe this was possible, that their small group with their medicinal formula could somehow prevent the coming conflict. But the practical part of her, the part trained in scientific observation and rational analysis, knew the odds were overwhelming. "You doubt," Evening Star said, reading her expression. "This is natural, but consider the strongest trees bend in the storm while the rigid ones break. We must be like the willow, flexible, adaptive, finding strength in yielding when necessary." There was wisdom in the Lakota healer's words, a perspective Sarah's Western training hadn't provided. "I'll try," she promised. Evening Star nodded, satisfied, then closed her eyes. "Rest now. Tomorrow brings new challenges." As Evening Star drifted into sleep, Sarah remained awake, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. The child within her moved restlessly, as if sensing its mother's unease. "It's all right," she whispered, placing a hand on her abdomen. "We're going to be fine." But as she finally lay down to sleep, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was approaching a critical juncture, one that would test them all to their limits. Grey Wolf did not arrive the following evening as planned, nor did he appear the next morning. By midday, Sarah's concern had grown into genuine alarm. "Something's wrong. He should have been here by now." Swift Elk, who had been scouting the perimeter of their hidden valley, nodded in agreement. "Maybe soldiers catch him." The possibility hung heavy in the air. If Grey Wolf had been captured, or worse, not only had they lost a valuable ally, but Hammond might now be aware of their location and plans. Evening Star, whose strength was gradually returning, spoke from where she sat sorting medicinal herbs. "We cannot wait longer. Must continue to Standing Bear's camp." "Do you know where it is?" Sarah asked. "Yes, 3 valleys north of here, but path is difficult, watched by both Wasiku soldiers and Lakota warriors." Evening Star's expression was grave. "Very dangerous for you, Wasiku Winyan." Sarah knew she was right. A heavily pregnant white woman approaching a war camp of Lakota warriors prepared for battle. It was hard to imagine a more perilous situation. Yet what choice did they have? The formula needed to be tested and documented. Hammond's biological weapons exposed, and Standing Bear warned about the true nature of the coming military operation. "We'll go at dusk," Sarah decided. "Travel by night to avoid patrols." Evening Star nodded approval. "Swift Elk will lead. He knows signs passwords to approach camp safely." The boy straightened with pride at this responsibility, though Sarah could see the anxiety beneath his brave facade. He was still a child, no matter how capable he had proven himself to be. They spent the afternoon making final preparations. Sarah checked and repacked her medical supplies, ensuring the precious bottles of medicine were secure. Evening Star prepared a special tea that she claimed would give them strength for the night's journey. Swift Elk fashioned crude spears from straight pine branches, insisting they needed some means of defense. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across their hidden valley, Sarah felt the child within her move vigorously, almost as if protesting the coming journey. She placed a hand on her abdomen, silently promising protection and safety. "It's time," Evening Star said, rising stiffly to her feet. Though still injured, she moved with more strength than the previous day. "We must—" She froze, head tilted as if listening. Swift Elk tensed as well, his young face suddenly alert. "What is it?" Sarah whispered. "Horses," Swift Elk replied softly. "Coming this way." Sarah strained her ears but heard nothing. Then faintly she detected what the others had already noticed, the distant sound of hoofbeats growing steadily louder. "Hide," Evening Star commanded. "Quickly." They doused the small fire and gathered their essential supplies, retreating to a cluster of boulders at the edge of the clearing. The formation created a natural shelter with spaces between the rocks that allowed them to observe the valley while remaining hidden. The hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped. Voices drifted to them on the evening breeze, men speaking English. "Soldiers." "Hammond's men," Sarah whispered. "How did they find this place?" Evening Star's expression was grim. "The secret path is known to few, but not impossible to discover. Or perhaps—" She didn't finish the thought, but Sarah understood the implication. Perhaps Grey Wolf had been captured, forced to reveal their location. Swift Elk pointed silently. 3 figures had entered the valley from the western approach, not the hidden path they had used, but a more conventional route. To Sarah's surprise, they weren't wearing military uniforms. 2 were dressed in civilian clothes, while the third wore buckskins similar to Grey Wolf's. "Not soldiers," Swift Elk whispered. "Different Wasiku." As the men moved closer to the remains of their camp, Sarah could see them more clearly. The one in buckskins was clearly a scout or guide of some kind. One of the others was older, gray-haired, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. The third was younger, dressed in an Eastern-style suit that looked out of place in the wilderness. "Who are they?" Sarah murmured. Evening Star shook her head, equally puzzled. The men examined the campsite, the older man kneeling to touch the ashes of their fire. "Recent," they heard him say, "within the past few hours." The younger man in the suit surveyed the valley with obvious unease. "Are you sure this is the place? Agent Forrester seems awfully remote." Sarah's breath caught. Agent Forrester, the government investigator Wells had mentioned in his notes. The man Grey Wolf had suggested they contact with evidence of Hammond's experiments. Without thinking, she started to rise from their hiding place. Evening Star grabbed her arm, pulling her back down. "Wait," the healer hissed. "Could be trap." Sarah hesitated. Evening Star was right to be cautious. These men could be imposters, or Forrester might not be as opposed to Hammond's methods as Wells had believed. The third man, the scout, was moving in a widening circle around the camp, reading signs on the ground that would be invisible to most observers. He approached their hiding place with unsettling directness. "3 people," he called to the others. "1 adult male, 1 adult female, 1 child. The male left yesterday heading east. The woman and child are still here." He looked directly at the boulders where they hid. "Ain't that right, folks? Might as well come out now." Swift Elk gripped his makeshift spear, his young face determined despite his fear. Evening Star placed a restraining hand on his shoulder, then addressed Sarah. "Your choice, Wasiku Winyan. Trust these men or run." Sarah took a deep breath, weighing their options. If these men were truly Agent Forrester and his associates, they represented their best chance of exposing Hammond's biological weapons program. If not, they were walking into a trap. She made her decision. "I'll go out first alone. If they are who they claim to be, I'll signal you to join me. If not, take Swift Elk and run back through the hidden path." Evening Star nodded grimly. "Be careful." Sarah emerged from behind the boulders, hands raised to show she carried no weapons. The 3 men turned toward her, expressions registering surprise at the sight of a pregnant white woman in such a remote location. "Dr. Sarah Winters," she said clearly, "formerly of Fort Laramie Medical Corps. And you are—" The older man stepped forward. "James Forrester, Department of the Interior. This is Mr. Edward Collins from the Washington Post, and Jacob Turner, our guide." He studied her with keen interest. "You're a long way from Fort Laramie, Doctor." "I could say the same of you, Agent Forrester." Sarah lowered her hands slowly. "What brings a government agent and a newspaper reporter to this particular valley at this particular time?" "We're investigating reports of unethical medical experiments being conducted on Lakota prisoners," Forrester replied directly. "A government agent named Marcus Wells was looking into the matter when he disappeared. His last known location was a stagecoach headed for Deadwood, the same stagecoach you were reportedly traveling on." Sarah felt a surge of hope. This aligned with what she knew of Wells's mission. "Wells died in the attack on our stagecoach, but not before giving me his notes on Hammond's biological weapons program." The reporter Collins stepped forward eagerly. "You have evidence of these experiments?" "Better than that," Sarah said. "I have a treatment for the modified tuberculosis strain Hammond has been testing on Lakota prisoners. A treatment developed in collaboration with a Lakota healer." Forrester and Collins exchanged glances. "Where is this healer now?" Forrester asked. Sarah hesitated, then called over her shoulder in Lakota one of the few phrases Evening Star had taught her. "Tanyan Yuwo. Come safely." Evening Star emerged from the hiding place, supporting Swift Elk, who maintained his grip on the makeshift spear. The 3 men tensed at the sight of the Lakota woman and child, but made no threatening moves. "This is Evening Star, a Lakota medicine woman, and Swift Elk, whose life we saved using our combined treatment," Sarah explained. "We've been developing a formula effective against Hammond's modified tuberculosis strain." Forrester approached Evening Star with formal respect, surprising Sarah by speaking a few words of halting Lakota. Evening Star responded cautiously but without hostility. "You speak our language," she observed in English. "Poorly," Forrester admitted. "I was stationed at Fort Rice for 3 years as a younger man, learned a little from the Lakota scouts there." He turned back to Sarah. "Dr. Winters, we've been looking for you since reports of the stagecoach attack. Wells's superiors became concerned when he missed his scheduled check-in." "How did you find us here?" Sarah asked, still not entirely convinced of their good intentions. "Grey Wolf," Turner the scout spoke up. "Met him 2 days ago near Fort Laramie. Said you'd be waiting here." Relief washed over Sarah. "Is he safe? We feared he'd been captured." "He's fine," Forrester assured her. He couldn't come himself too risky with Hammond's increased patrols, but he told us where to find you and gave us recognition signals to use with the Lakota. Recognition signals? Evening Star asked sharply. Turner made a gesture with his hand, a subtle movement that caused Evening Star to relax visibly. Grey Wolf teaches well, she acknowledged. With the initial tension dispelled, they gathered around the rekindled fire. Sarah and Evening Star explained everything: the Stagecoach attack, their unlikely partnership, Swift Elk's illness and recovery, and most importantly, the development of the treatment formula. Collins took copious notes, his face growing increasingly grave as the full extent of Hammond's program became clear. Forrester listened with professional intensity, occasionally asking precise questions that revealed his thorough understanding of military protocols and medical ethics. This formula, he said finally, you're certain it works? It saves Swift Elk, Sarah replied. And based on my medical knowledge, the combination of traditional remedies and modern antibacterial agents should be effective against the modified strain. But we need to document more cases, establish a clear record of its efficacy, and we need to stop Hammond's operation, Evening Star added. 7 days ago, Grey Wolf told us Hammond plans a final solution for the Lakota in these hills. The time grows short. There's more, Sarah said. The Lakota under Chief Standing Bear are planning to attack Fort Laramie. If that happens, Hammond will have the justification he needs for a full-scale military response. Forrester's expression darkened. When is this attack planned? The next full moon, 3 days from now. The agent rose and paced the small clearing, clearly weighing options and responsibilities. This is worse than we thought. Collins, your newspaper needs to break this story immediately. Hammond's experiments, the weaponized disease, all of it. The reporter nodded eagerly. With Dr. Winter's testimony and these notes from Agent Wells, we have enough for the front page. But if we could also document the treatment's effectiveness— There's no time, Forrester said. We need to act now on multiple fronts. Dr. Winters, you and your formula need to get to Washington immediately. Your testimony before the Congressional Committee on Indian Affairs could stop Hammond's operation through official channels. No, Sarah said firmly. I won't leave. The formula needs to be tested further, and Standing Bear must be warned about Hammond's true plans. The disease is spreading among his people. They need this treatment now, not after weeks of political deliberations in Washington. Evening Star nodded agreement. We go to Standing Bear, show him medicine works, stop attack on Fort. Forrester looked troubled. It's too dangerous. Standing Bear's warriors won't welcome a white woman in their camp, especially not now with tension so high. They will if she comes with me, Evening Star said with quiet authority, and with Swift Elk, whose life she saved, and with proof that Hammond spreads disease deliberately among our people. The conversation continued late into the night. Plans proposed and discarded risks weighed against potential benefits. Finally, a compromise was reached. Collins would return east immediately with copies of Wells's notes, Sarah's documentation of the formula, and sworn statements from all of them about Hammond's experiments. Meanwhile, Forrester, Turner, Sarah, and Evening Star would attempt to reach Standing Bear's camp to prevent the attack and deliver the treatment to those already infected. As they prepared for sleep, Forrester drew Sarah aside. There's something you should know, Doctor. Something Grey Wolf told me that he hadn't shared with you. Sarah tensed. What is it? Dr. Reed, the father of your child, is working with Hammond on these experiments. He's been providing medical oversight for the program documenting the disease's progression in test subjects. The revelation struck Sarah like a physical blow. Thomas involved in such unconscionable acts, the man she had once respected, even loved, despite his betrayal. Are you certain? She whispered. Forrester nodded grimly. Grey Wolf has seen him at the fort visiting the quarantine tents where the test subjects are kept. He wanted you to know, but couldn't bring himself to tell you directly. Sarah felt sick. Another betrayal deeper and more profound than the personal one she had already suffered. Thomas hadn't just abandoned her, he had violated every principle of medical ethics, every oath they had both sworn. Thank you for telling me, she said, her voice hollow. I needed to know. That night, as the others slept, Sarah sat alone by the dying fire, one hand resting on her swollen abdomen, where Thomas Reed's child grew. What would she tell this child someday? That its father had used medicine, the art of healing, as a weapon against innocent people. You will be better, she whispered to her unborn child. You will heal, not harm. This I promise you. In the darkness beyond the firelight, Evening Star watched silently, her aged eyes full of understanding and shared pain. Bye. Dawn broke clear and cold over the hidden valley. The unlikely company prepared for the journey to Standing Bear's camp, a journey that would take them through the most dangerous territory in the Black Hills, patrolled by both Hammond soldiers and Lakota warriors suspicious of any outsiders. Sarah checked her medical supplies one last time, ensuring the precious bottles of medicine were secure. Evening Star, moving with increasing strength as her wounds healed, prepared small pouches of herbs and roots that might be needed along the way. Swift, Elk, and Turner scouted the approaches to the valley, confirming their path was clear for the moment. Forrester approached Sarah as she finished her preparations. "Are you certain about this, Doctor? There's still time to reconsider. You could go east with Collins testified before Congress, ensure Hammond's operation is shut down through official channels." "And how many would die in the meantime?" Sarah countered. "No, Agent Forrester. My place is here, bringing this treatment to those who need it most urgently." She met his gaze steadily. "Besides, I have a promise to keep to Evening Star, to Swift Elk, and to myself." Forrester nodded, accepting her decision. "Then let's be on our way. We have a long journey ahead and little time to spare." As they set out from the hidden valley, Sarah cast one last glance back at the place that had offered them temporary sanctuary. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and the slim possibility that their small group might somehow prevent a war and expose a conspiracy that reached to the highest levels of the military. The child within her moved as if sensing the gravity of the moment. Sarah placed a protective hand over her abdomen and whispered, "We're doing the right thing, the only thing we can do." Then she turned and followed the others into the wilderness, toward whatever fate awaited them in Standing Bear's camp. The journey to save two peoples had truly begun. They traveled through the day, keeping to ravines and forested slopes where pine shadows concealed their passage. Turner led the way, his woodsman's instincts sensing danger before it materialized. Twice they froze in hidden gullies as army patrols passed nearby, the soldiers' voices carrying clearly in the mountain air. By mid-afternoon, Sarah was struggling. The added weight of her pregnancy combined with the difficult terrain left her breathless and aching. She refused to complain, pushing forward with grim determination, but Evening Star noticed her distress. "We rest," the Lakota healer announced, her tone allowing no argument. "Short time only." They found shelter in a small grove of aspens, their golden leaves rustling in the slight breeze. Sarah sank gratefully onto a fallen log, her hand pressed against the small of her back. Evening Star sat beside her, offering a small water skin. "Drink, special mixture, gives strength." Sarah accepted the skin, taking a cautious sip. The liquid was cool and slightly sweet, with an herbal undertone she couldn't identify. Almost immediately, she felt a subtle wave of energy spreading through her tired body. "Thank you," she said, returning the water skin. "What is it?" "Many plants together. Old recipe for women carrying new life." Evening Star's weathered face softened slightly. "My mother taught me, her mother before her." It was the first time the Lakota healer had mentioned her own family beyond Rain Crow and Grey Wolf. Sarah realized how little she knew about this remarkable woman who had saved her life and become her unexpected ally. "Your knowledge is extraordinary," Sarah said. "Not just of healing plants, but how they work together, how they affect different conditions." Evening Star acknowledged this with a slight nod. "Knowledge is life. Each generation adds small part, nothing wasted, nothing forgotten." She gestured towards Sarah's medical bag. "Your medicine same. Many healers before you adding knowledge." Yes, though Western medicine often discards traditional wisdom in favor of new discoveries. Sarah thought of Solomon Washington's treatments dismissed by Hammond despite their effectiveness. "We lose much that way." "Both ways have value," Evening Star said pragmatically. "New and old together, stronger than either alone." She glanced towards Swift Elk, who was helping Turner scout their next route. "The boy lives because of this." Sarah nodded, understanding the deeper meaning in Evening Star's words. Their alliance unlikely, as it was represented more than just a temporary partnership. It was a model for what might be possible between their peoples if given the chance. Forrester approached, interrupting their conversation. "Turner says we're about 4 hours from Standing Bear's camp, but we need to cross open ground to reach it. Too dangerous in daylight." "We wait for darkness," Evening Star agreed. "Safer then." "There's something else," Forrester said, his expression troubled. Turner spotted fresh tracks, a large patrol, perhaps 20 soldiers, heading in the same direction we are. Sarah felt a chill. Hammond's men, most likely, and they're moving with purpose as if they know exactly where they're going. The implication was clear. Someone had betrayed Standing Bear's location. The Lakota chief's camp was in imminent danger. Evening Star rose with sudden urgency. "Must warn them. Now, not wait for darkness." It's too risky, Forrester argued. In daylight across open ground, we'd be spotted immediately. I go alone, Evening Star insisted. No secret ways. No, Sarah said firmly. You're still recovering from your wounds. I can see how the exertion has affected you. She turned to Forrester. Is there another option? Some way to warn the camp without exposing ourselves. The agent considered this, then spoke to Turner in low tones. The scout nodded, pointing to features on the distant landscape visible through gaps in the aspen grove. There might be a way, Forrester said finally. Signal fires, the Lakota use them to communicate between camps. If we could light one on that ridge, he indicated a rocky promontory to the west. It might alert Standing Bear sentries. What signal would warn of soldiers coming? Sarah asked. Evening Star and Swift Elk exchanged glances. 3 fires spaced apart, the boy said. Means enemies approach. Many enemies. Turner nodded confirmation. I've seen it used before. It's a common warning signal among the Plains tribes. Can you reach that ridge without being seen? Forrester asked Turner. The scout studied the terrain, then nodded slowly. Maybe. It's risky but possible if I move carefully. I go too, Swift Elk insisted. No fire signal better. Evening Star started to object, but the boy stood his ground. I am fastest. Know these hills. Can hide better than any wasiku. There was a tense silence as they weighed the danger. Finally, Evening Star spoke. He is right. Small boy on mountain soldiers look for men, not children. And he knows proper signal. Turner looked to Forrester, who nodded reluctantly. All right, but you follow my instructions exactly, boy. No risks, no heroics. Swift Elk's solemn expression was almost comical on his young face. I understand. Follow orders like warrior. As Turner and Swift Elk prepared for their mission gathering materials for the signal fires, Sarah drew Forrester aside. If Hammond's men reach Standing Bear's camp before our warning, she couldn't finish the sentence. It would be a massacre, Forrester completed grimly. Hammond wouldn't hesitate to attack a hostile encampment, especially if he can claim they were planning to strike Fort Laramie. And if our warning succeeds, what then? Forrester's expression was troubled. Best case, Standing Bear evacuates the camp, disperses his people to safer locations. Worst case, he decides to attack immediately, believing he's lost the element of surprise. Neither outcome would prevent the larger conflict brewing between Hammond's forces and the Lakota. Only exposing the biological weapons program and delivering the treatment to both communities could achieve that. We need to reach Standing Bear ourselves, Sarah said. Convince him to hold off his attack until Hammond's true plan is exposed. One problem at a time, Dr. Forrester advised. First, let's warn them of the immediate danger. Turner and Swift Elk departed soon after the weathered scout and the Lakota boy, slipping away through the aspen grove like shadows. Sarah watched them go, anxiety tightening her chest. Swift Elk was so young to bear such responsibility, yet he moved with confidence beyond his years. He is stronger than he looks, Evening Star said, reading Sarah's concern. His spirit was tested in Fever Dream, came back stronger. They settled in to wait, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found her hand moving repeatedly to her abdomen, seeking reassurance in the movements of her unborn child. What kind of world would this baby be born into? One of continued conflict and hatred, or one where healing and cooperation might be possible? The sun began its slow descent toward the western peaks, casting long shadows across the mountain slopes. Still no sign of Turner and Swift Elk, no signal fires on the distant ridge. Something's wrong, Forrester muttered, pacing the small clearing. They should have reached the ridge by now. Evening Star sat motionless, her eyes closed, lips moving in what Sarah assumed was silent prayer. The Lakota healer's calm presence was an anchor amid their growing anxiety. Then, just as the sun touched the highest peaks, a flicker of orange appeared on the distant ridge. One fire, then a second, then a third, spaced precisely apart. They did it, Sarah breathed. Almost immediately, they saw movement in the valley below, tiny figures emerging from what had appeared to be empty landscape. The hidden Lakota camp was responding to the warning. Now we wait, Forrester said. Turner will bring the boy back here, then we proceed to the camp after dark. But as twilight deepened into dusk, Turner and Swift Elk had still not returned. Sarah's concern grew with each passing minute, and even Evening Star's composed expression showed signs of strain. I'm going to look for them, Forrester decided, checking his revolver. No, Evening Star said sharply. More danger if separated. Wait longer. Before Forrester could argue, a rustling sound came from the edge of the grove. They tensed, weapons ready, as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Turner alone and breathing hard. Blood stained his buckskin shirt from a wound on his upper arm. "Soldiers," he gasped. "Spotted us, coming down from the ridge, fired on us." Sarah was already moving forward, medical bag in hand. "Where's Swift Elk?" Turner's expression was grim. "We got separated in the confusion. He was heading back toward the camp using a different route. I tried to follow, but—" He gestured at his wounded arm. Evening Star's face revealed nothing, but Sarah saw her hands clench at her sides. "You left him a child. He insisted we split up. Said he knew a hidden path the soldiers wouldn't find." Turner winced as Sarah began examining his wound. "He's a brave boy. Smart, too. And now alone in dangerous territory," Forrester said, his tone sharp with concern. Sarah cleaned and bandaged Turner's arm, a flesh wound from a bullet that had grazed him, but caused no serious damage. As she worked, her mind raced with worry for Swift Elk. The boy had proven remarkably capable, but he was still a child, facing armed soldiers in failing light. "We must find him," she said, securing the bandage. "The signal worked," Turner reported. "Standing Bear's camp is breaking apart, women and children being evacuated, warriors preparing defensive positions. But Hammond's men are close, no more than an hour behind us." Forrester weighed their options. "If we search for the boy, we risk capture ourselves. If we proceed to the camp as planned, we might miss him entirely." "I go find Swift Elk," Evening Star said with finality. "You three go to camp. Bring medicine warning about disease weapon." "No," Sarah countered. "We stay together. Swift Elk knows these hills better than any of us. He said himself he knew a hidden path. The best chance of finding him is at Standing Bear's camp. That's where he would go." Evening Star studied Sarah's face, perhaps searching for any hint of deception or false comfort. Finally, she nodded once. "We go to camp. But if Swift Elk not there," the unspoken threat hung in the air. If harm had come to the boy, there would be a reckoning. They set out as true darkness fell, moving cautiously through forest and ravine toward the Lakota camp. Turner's wound slowed their progress, but the scout refused to rest, driven by guilt over leaving Swift Elk behind. Sarah struggled as well, her pregnancy making the night journey especially difficult. The earlier burst of energy from Evening Star's herbal mixture had faded, leaving her exhausted and aching. Still, she pushed forward, driven by concern for Swift Elk and the urgency of their mission. They were perhaps a mile from the camp when Evening Star suddenly froze, raising her hand for silence. For several heartbeats, they stood motionless in the darkness, straining to hear what had alerted the Lakota healer. Then Sarah heard it too, voices ahead speaking Lakota. Evening Star responded with a series of words that sounded like a challenge or password. A tense silence followed before figures materialized from the darkness. 3 Lakota warriors, weapons ready. A rapid exchange in Lakota followed, with Evening Star doing most of the talking. The warriors' expressions shifted from suspicion to surprise as she spoke. Finally, one of them nodded and gestured for the group to follow. "What did you tell them?" Sarah asked quietly as they resumed their journey. "That we bring medicine for the sickness. That we have warning about Hammond's real plan." Evening Star's voice tightened. "Asked about Swift Elk. And they not see him, but many people moving in hills tonight. He could be anywhere." They were led through a series of increasingly narrow ravines, eventually emerging into what had clearly been a large encampment until very recently. Now it was mostly dismantled, with only a few tipis still standing. Warriors moved purposefully through the area, carrying weapons and supplies, while the last of the women, children, and elders were being led away along hidden trails. Their escort brought them to the largest remaining teepee at the center of the camp. Inside, illuminated by a small fire, a group of men sat in council. At their center was a figure whose bearing marked him unmistakably as a leader, Standing Bear. The chief was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps 40, with a face that combined strength and intelligence. He wore a simple buckskin shirt adorned with minimal beadwork, and his hair was plaited in 2 long braids. His only concession to his status was a single eagle feather tied at the back of his head. Evening Star stepped forward, addressing Standing Bear and Lakota with formal respect. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she recognized the gravity of the moment. This was the man who held the power to continue or halt the planned attack on Fort Laramie, an attack that would give Hammond the justification he needed for his final solution. Standing Bear listened impassively to Evening Star, occasionally asking questions that she answered with increasing urgency. Finally, he turned his attention to the white members of their group. "You are far from your people, Wasiku," he said in clear accented English. "Evening Star says you bring medicine for the sickness that kills my people. Says you have proof this sickness comes from Colonel Hammond." Forrester stepped forward. Chief Standing Bear, I am James Forrester, agent of the Department of the Interior. This is Dr. Sarah Winters, formerly of Fort Laramie Medical Corps, and Jacob Turner, our guide. What Evening Star has told you is true. We have evidence that Hammond has been testing a modified form of tuberculosis on Lakota prisoners, a disease weapon he plans to use more widely against your people. Standing Bear's expression revealed nothing. Many promises have been made by Wasiku government men. Many lies told. Why should I believe you now? Because I've seen the effects of this disease firsthand, Sarah said, stepping forward, despite Forrester's warning glance. I've treated it in your people, including a boy named Swift Elk who was near death when he came to us. A murmur ran through the assembled warriors at the mention of Swift Elk's name. The boy is known to us, Standing Bear acknowledged. Grandson of Speckled Fawn, who is respected among our people. You say you healed him. Together with Evening Star, Sarah confirmed. We combined our medicines to create a treatment effective against this particular strain of the disease. We've brought it to share with your people and to expose Hammond's use of disease as a weapon. Standing Bear studied her for a long moment. A Wasiku woman with child comes to a Lakota war camp bearing medicine and warnings. His mouth tightened. This could be trick. You could be Hammond's. If I wanted to spy for Hammond, I wouldn't come here openly, Sarah countered. I would remain at Fort Laramie where I had position and respect until I was dismissed for being unmarried and pregnant. This blunt statement seemed to surprise Standing Bear. He turned to Evening Star, questioning her in Lakota. Her response was equally direct, gesturing towards Sarah with clear approval. Finally, Standing Bear nodded. Evening Star vouches for you. Says you saved Swift Elk when he was beyond hope. This carries weight. He addressed Forrester. What is it you want from us, Agent of the Interior? Delay your attack on Fort Laramie, Forrester said simply. Give us time to expose Hammond's biological weapons program to Washington. With evidence of his illegal activities, we can have him removed from command and potentially prevent further hostilities. And while we wait, more of my people die from this sickness, more soldiers enter our sacred hills. Standing Bear's voice hardened. The time for talking is past. Hammond brings war to us, whether we wish it or not. That's why we've brought the treatment, Sarah interjected, to help those already sick and protect others from infection. And yes, Hammond is planning an attack. His men are coming toward this camp right now. But if you strike first, you'll give him exactly what he wants, justification for a full-scale military response. A tense silence followed her words. The council members exchanged glances, some angry, others thoughtful. Standing Bear remained impassive, weighing her arguments against his people's suffering and justified anger. Before he could respond, a commotion arose outside the teepee. A warrior entered, speaking rapidly in Lakota. Standing Bear rose immediately, his expression alarmed. What is it? Forrester asked. Soldiers, Evening Star translated grimly. Coming up valley, many soldiers. Hammond's men had found them despite the evacuation. The decision about delaying the attack had just become moot. The battle was coming to them. Standing Bear issued rapid orders, warriors rushing to comply. To Forrester, he said, You will stay here. If you have truly come to help, you will not be harmed. If this is trick, he left the threat unspoken. As the chief departed to organize his forces, Sarah turned to Evening Star. The medicine we need to distribute it now before the fighting starts, especially to anyone already showing symptoms. Evening Star nodded. Come, many sick ones gathered in Healing Lodge. They left the council teepee escorted by a stern-faced warrior who clearly considered them as much prisoners as guests. Outside the camp was a flurry of activity warriors taking defensive positions, the last of the non-combatants being hustled away through hidden escape routes. The Healing Lodge was a low, dome-shaped structure at the edge of the camp. Inside, perhaps a dozen people lay on pallets, men, women, and children, all showing signs of the advanced tuberculosis variant. The air was thick with the smell of illness and herbal remedies. Sarah's medical training took over immediately. She knelt beside the nearest patient, a young woman whose breathing was labored and whose skin burned with fever. These were the same symptoms Swift Elk had shown, but in some cases even more advanced. We need to begin treatment immediately, she told Evening Star, opening her medical bag to retrieve the precious bottles of medicine, starting with the most critical cases. For the next hour, they moved from patient to patient, administering the treatment according to the carefully developed formula. Sarah explained the dosage and administration to the Lakota women assisting in the Healing Lodge, ensuring they could continue the treatment in the days to come. Outside, they could hear the growing sounds of conflict, shouts, occasional gunfire. Hammond's forces had engaged with Standing Bear's warriors, though the main battle had not yet commenced. Sarah had just finished treating the last patient when Forrester appeared at the entrance to the healing lodge, his expression urgent. "Doctor, we have a problem. Hammond himself is with the troops. Turner spotted him at the head of the column, and he's brought Dr. Reed with him." Sarah felt as if the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Thomas here, the father of her child, the man who had once been her mentor and lover, now participating in Hammond's unconscionable acts. "Why would Reed be with a combat patrol?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Turner thinks they're bringing more of the disease agent planning to release it directly into the water sources near the camp." Forrester's face was grim. "Hammond's not taking chances. He wants to eliminate the Lakota presence in these hills completely." Evening Star's expression hardened at this news. "Must warn Standing Bear. Stop this evil medicine from being used." They hurried back toward the center of the camp, but the situation had deteriorated rapidly. The sounds of gunfire were much closer now, and warriors were falling back toward the inner defensive positions. "Hammond's forces are larger than we thought," Forrester reported as they took cover behind a rock formation. "At least 50 soldiers, well-armed and advancing methodically. Standing Bear's warriors are outnumbered and outgunned." Sarah's mind raced. They needed to expose Hammond's biological weapons program, but with battle already joined, who would listen? They needed to prevent the release of more disease agents, but how could they reach Hammond and Reed through the fighting? Evening Star touched her arm, drawing her attention to movement on a ridge overlooking the battlefield. Through the darkness and confusion, Sarah could just make out two figures, one tall and commanding in an officer's uniform, the other in civilian clothes but with the unmistakable bearing of a physician. Hammond and Reed. They were observing the battle from a safe distance, accompanied by what appeared to be two soldiers carrying a large wooden crate, undoubtedly containing the disease agents Forrester had mentioned. "We need to reach that ridge," Sarah said, decision crystallizing in her mind. "Stop them before they can release more of the disease." "Too dangerous," Forrester objected. "You're in no condition to climb that ridge, Doctor, and there's active fighting between here and there." "I'll go," Turner volunteered. "I can circle around, approach from behind." "They'd shoot you on sight," Sarah argued. "But Reed might hesitate, and Hammond would want to question me about what I know, which gives us an opening." "I go with her," Evening Star said with finality. "No paths they will not watch." Forrester looked like he wanted to object further, but the urgency of the situation overrode his concerns. "All right, Turner and I will try to reach Standing Bear. Explain what's happening. Maybe we can negotiate a ceasefire long enough to expose Hammond's real plan." With the decision made, they separated Forrester and Turner, heading toward the heart of the Lakota defenses, while Sarah and Evening Star slipped away toward a narrow ravine that might offer a route to the ridge. The path Evening Star chose was steep and treacherous, especially in the darkness. Sarah struggled, her pregnancy making balance difficult on the rocky slope. Evening Star moved with surprising agility despite her age and recent injuries, occasionally reaching back to offer a steadying hand. "Almost there," the Lakota healer whispered as they neared the top of the ravine. "Must be silent now." They could hear voices ahead, Hammond and Reed discussing something with cold precision that carried clearly in the night air. "The primary targets are the water sources," Hammond was saying. "This new variant can survive in water for up to 2 weeks according to your research. That should be more than sufficient." "The dispersal needs to be precise," Reed replied, his familiar voice sending a chill through Sarah. "Too concentrated in one location and it becomes obvious. Too diluted and it loses effectiveness. Just make sure it works, Doctor. Washington wants these hills cleared for mining operations by spring. This uprising gives us the perfect justification for a final solution to the Lakota problem." Sarah felt sick. The callousness with which they discussed mass murder through disease was beyond comprehension. This wasn't warfare, it was genocide calculated and clinical. Evening Star touched her arm, indicating they should move forward. They crept to the edge of the ravine, now only about 30 yards from where Hammond, Reed, and the two soldiers stood beside the wooden crate. "How do we stop them?" Sarah whispered. Before Evening Star could answer, one of the soldiers turned suddenly in their direction. "Sir, movement in the ravine." Everything happened at once. The soldiers raised their rifles. Hammond drew his sidearm. Sarah and Evening Star froze, exposed and vulnerable. Then a small figure darted from the shadows behind the soldiers, swift elk moving with the speed and agility of youth. He slammed into the legs of one soldier, sending the man stumbling into his companion. Both rifles discharged harmlessly into the air. "Run!" the boy shouted in English, already darting away himself. Evening Star reacted instantly, pulling Sarah back toward the ravine. But Sarah resisted, suddenly seeing an opportunity in the confusion. Hammond and Reed were momentarily distracted by Swift Elk's interference, their attention drawn away from the wooden crate. "The disease agents," Sarah said urgently. "We have to destroy them." Without waiting for Evening Star's response, she emerged from the ravine and moved toward the crate. Hammond spotted her almost immediately. "Hold your fire," he ordered the soldiers who had recovered their balance. "Well, well, Dr. Winters, we thought you perished in the Stagecoach attack." Sarah straightened to her full height, one hand instinctively protecting her abdomen. "I survived, Colonel, as did my knowledge of your biological weapons program." Reed stepped forward, his face registering shock as he took in her pregnant condition in the moonlight. "Sarah, my God." "Hello, Thomas," she said coldly. "I see you found a new application for medical science. Disease as a weapon, a far cry from the Hippocratic Oath, wouldn't you say?" Hammond's eyes narrowed. "You're in no position to make accusations, Doctor. Consorting with hostiles, interfering with a military operation, that's treason during wartime. Is it, or is using disease against civilian populations the real crime here?" Sarah took a deliberate step toward the wooden crate. "Agent Forrester of the Department of the Interior seems to think so. As does Mr. Collins of the Washington Post, who's currently traveling east with copies of all your records." A flicker of uncertainty crossed Hammond's face. "You're bluffing. M.I. Marcus Wells kept very detailed notes on your program before his death. Notes that are now in the hands of federal investigators." Sarah was buying time, trying to maneuver closer to the crate while keeping Hammond and Reed distracted. Reed's expression had shifted from shock to calculation. "Sarah, you don't understand. This is advanced medical research with applications beyond the current situation. Yes, it's being deployed tactically now, but the long-term benefits to medicine could be enormous." "Benefits?" Sarah couldn't keep the disgust from her voice. "You're using disease to murder innocent people, Thomas. There's no benefit that could justify that." Hammond had clearly heard enough. "Arrest her," he ordered the soldiers. "We'll sort this out back at the fort." As the soldiers moved toward her, Evening Star emerged from the ravine, something clutched in her hand. Before anyone could react, she threw it directly at the wooden crate. The small clay pot shattered on impact, liquid spraying across the crate and the ground around it. "What the hell?" Hammond started forward, then stopped as a pungent odor filled the air. "Oil and herbs," Evening Star said calmly, producing a flint. "Very flammable." The threat was clear. One spark and the entire crate of disease agents would be engulfed in flames. "You wouldn't dare," Hammond snarled. "You'd kill us all, including your precious doctor friend." "To stop this evil, yes." Evening Star's voice was steady. "Better quick death than slow sickness that kills many." A tense standoff ensued with Hammond and his men frozen in place while Evening Star held the flint ready. Sarah used the moment to move to the Lakota healer's side. "Where's Swift Elk?" she whispered. "Safe. He follow us from camp." "Brave boy." There was pride in Evening Star's voice despite the danger they faced. Hammond's cold gaze shifted between them. "This accomplishes nothing. Even if you destroy this batch, we have more. The program continues with or without your interference." "Perhaps," Sarah acknowledged. "But can you say the same about your career once your superiors learn you have been conducting unauthorized biological weapons tests? Once the public reads about it in the Washington Post?" Something flickered in Hammond's eyes, doubt perhaps, or the first hint of fear. He was a pragmatic man above all else, and the political ramifications of exposure would not be lost on him. Reed stepped forward, addressing Sarah directly. "There's another option here, one that benefits everyone." His voice took on the persuasive tone she remembered so well from their time together. "Work with us, Sarah. Your research combined with what we've developed could lead to extraordinary advances. Your name on the papers, your future secured." "And the Lakota?" Sarah asked pointedly. Reed waved a dismissive hand. "Progress requires sacrifice. You know that as well as I do." "Not this kind of sacrifice." Sarah's voice hardened. "Not deliberate extermination of an entire people." "Enough talking," Hammond cut in. "This ends now." He raised his pistol, aiming not at Sarah or Evening Star, but at the wooden crate itself. "If that crate burns, the disease is released into the air anyway. We're upwind, you're not. Simple tactics, Doctor." It was a calculation Sarah hadn't considered. Burning the crate might actually accomplish Hammond's goal, releasing the disease agents into the air, where they could be carried down into the valley where the Lakota were fighting. Before she could respond, a new voice called from the darkness behind Hammond. "Colonel Hammond, Dr. Reed, you are hereby ordered to stand down by authority of the United States government. Forrester emerged from the shadows accompanied by Turner and surprisingly several Lakota warriors. Among them was Standing Bear himself, his expression cold but controlled. "Agent Forrester," Hammond sneered, "you're exceeding your authority. This is a military operation against hostile forces. The Department of the Interior has no jurisdiction here. Biological warfare against civilians is not a sanctioned military operation, Colonel." Forrester's voice was steely. "It's a war crime, and I have full authority to investigate such crimes regardless of who commits them." Hammond's face contorted with anger. "These savages are planning to attack Fort Laramie. We have intelligence." "False intelligence," Standing Bear interrupted. "Planted by you to justify this." He gestured toward the wooden crate. "My warriors found similar boxes near our water sources. Your men were placing them before the battle even began." Hammond's expression confirmed the accusation. For a moment, Sarah thought he might order his men to open fire despite being outnumbered. Instead, he lowered his pistol slowly. "You have no proof that would stand up in Washington," he said coldly. "It's your word against mine, a respected officer versus a government clerk and a disgraced female doctor." "That might have been true yesterday," Forrester agreed. "But today, we have this." He held up a folded paper. "A sworn statement from Dr. Reed's assistant at Fort Laramie detailing the entire program, including dates, test subjects, and your direct orders." He was quite thorough. Reed went pale. "Matthews, he wouldn't dare." "He already has," Forrester said. "Signed and witnessed before he left for Denver last week. Away from your influence." It was a bluff. Sarah could see it in Forrester's eyes, but a convincing one. Hammond and Reed exchanged uncertain glances, their confidence visibly crumbling. "There's more," Forrester continued, pressing his advantage. "Dr. Winters and Evening Star have developed a treatment effective against your modified disease strain. They have already begun administering it to infected Lakota. Your weapon is being neutralized even as we speak." Hammond's composure finally broke. "That's impossible. Reed assured me there could be no treatment developed quickly enough to matter." "Reed was wrong," Sarah said simply, "because he underestimated what could be accomplished when Western and traditional medicine work together rather than in opposition." Standing Bear stepped forward, his authority evident in every movement. "Enough talk. You will surrender now, Hammond. You and your disease maker. Face justice for what you have done." For a moment it seemed Hammond might comply. Then with startling speed he raised his pistol again, not towards Standing Bear or Forrester, but directly at Sarah. "If I'm to face charges, I'll make sure the key witness doesn't testify," he snarled. Several things happened simultaneously. Reed shouted, "No," and lunged toward Hammond. Evening Star struck her flint, igniting the oil-soaked crate. And from the ravine behind Sarah came a distinctive sound, the crack of a rifle. Hammond staggered, a look of surprise replacing his rage, as a red stain spread across his chest. He fell to his knees, then toppled forward onto the burning crate, his body partly smothering the flames that had just begun to consume the wooden container. In the chaos that followed, Sarah turned toward the source of the shot. Grey Wolf stood at the edge of the ravine, rifle still raised, his expression grim but resolute. "You came," she said, relief flooding through her. "I followed," he corrected, lowering the rifle. "Watched, waited for the right moment." He glanced at his mother. "You were right to trust the Wasiku Winyan. She is brave." Standing Bear was already issuing orders in Lakota. Warriors moved to secure Reed and the two soldiers, while others carefully removed Hammond's body from the partially burned crate. "The disease," Sarah said urgently. "We need to ensure it's completely destroyed with no risk of dispersal." Forrester nodded, directing Turner to help. They quickly gathered dry wood and brush, building a much larger fire around the crate. The intense heat would destroy any remaining disease agents, rendering them harmless. As the fire blazed, casting long shadows across the ridge, Sarah found herself face to face with Thomas Reed. The soldiers had bound his hands, but he stood straight, his expression a complex mixture of defiance and resignation. "I never intended for this to happen," he said quietly. "The research was supposed to be theoretical, understanding disease transmission and mutation. Hammond took it in a direction I never anticipated." "Yet you continued to participate," Sarah observed, "to facilitate his plans." Reed had no answer for that. After a moment he asked, "The child?" "Is none of your concern," Sarah replied firmly. "You surrendered any right to know when you chose Hammond's path over your oath as a healer." Something like regret flickered in Reed's eyes, but Sarah turned away. His choices had led him here, just as hers had led her to this unlikely alliance with Evening Star and the Lakota. Their paths had diverged irrevocably. Standing Bear approached regarding Sarah with newfound respect. The battle below has ceased. Hammond's soldiers have withdrawn after seeing the signal fires we lit. It seems none were eager to continue without their commander. And your warriors, Sarah asked. They obey my orders. There will be no attack on Fort Laramie, not now when we have proof of Hammond's crimes and a treatment for the sickness he spread. The chief's stern features softened slightly. You have honored your promises, Dr. Winters. Few Wasiku can claim as much. Sarah nodded, accepting the compliment for what it was, a rare acknowledgement of trust from a leader with every reason to be suspicious. What happens now, she asked Forrester, who was supervising the destruction of the disease crate. Reed and the soldiers will be taken to Fort Laramie under guard mine and Standing Bears. The evidence will be presented to the fort's second-in-command, who I believe is not part of Hammond's inner circle. From there, formal charges will be filed in Washington. Forrester's expression was determined. This won't be covered up. Too many people know now. Sarah felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her as the tension of the confrontation began to fade. She swayed slightly, steadying herself against a nearby rock. Evening Star was at her side immediately. You need rest. The journey, the danger, not good for mother or child. Sarah couldn't argue. The events of the past hours had depleted her last reserves of strength. But the treatment distribution needs to continue. There are still sick people in the camp who haven't received their doses. I will see to it, Evening Star assured her. You have taught others how to administer. Now you must care for yourself and the new life you carry. As if in agreement, the baby shifted within her, a strong movement that reminded Sarah of her most immediate responsibility. She nodded, allowing Evening Star to guide her toward a more sheltered area of the ridge where she could rest while the others made arrangements for the return to the Lakota camp. Swift Elk appeared as if from nowhere, his young face alight with excitement despite the gravity of recent events. We won, he exclaimed in English. Bad soldiers gone Hammond dead. Sarah managed a tired smile. You were very brave, Swift Elk, running out like that to distract the soldiers. The boy straightened proudly. I am warrior now. Standing Bear said so. Evening Star spoke to him in Lakota, her tone gently admonishing despite the pride evident in her eyes. Swift Elk nodded, then darted away to help the adults with their preparations. What did you tell him? Sarah asked. That even warriors need sleep, Evening Star replied with the ghost of a smile, and that you need quiet to rest. They made their way carefully down from the ridge, following a path less steep than the ravine they had climbed earlier. Grey Wolf accompanied them, moving ahead to ensure the route was safe. The sounds of battle had ceased, entirely replaced by the normal nocturnal chorus of the forest. As they walked, Sarah found herself reflecting on the extraordinary partnership that had developed between herself and Evening Star. Two women from different worlds brought together by chance and necessity, who had found common ground in their shared dedication to healing. What will you do now? She asked the Lakota healer. After all this is resolved, Evening Star considered the question. Continue healing, teaching others the medicine we created together. Some things change. Some remain. She glanced at Sarah. And you? I don't know, Sarah admitted. I can't return to Fort Laramie even with Hammond gone. Too many memories, too much history. Perhaps new place, Evening Star suggested, where both medicines valued, where healing happens across borders, not just within them. The idea resonated with Sarah, a place where Western and traditional approaches could complement each other, where the knowledge of both cultures could be preserved and extended. Not just for the Lakota and white settlers in the Black Hills, but potentially for all who needed healing. It would need to be neutral ground, she mused. Not clearly in white territory or Lakota territory, a place where both would feel welcome. Such places rare, Evening Star acknowledged, but not impossible. They had reached the valley floor where members of Standing Bear's band were beginning to return to the partially dismantled camp. Despite the late-hour activity was increasing as news spread of Hammond's death and the exposure of his plot. Grey Wolf rejoined them, bringing word that Forrester had arranged for Sarah to rest in one of the few remaining teepees. The agent says you should sleep and while you can. Tomorrow will bring many questions, many decisions. Sarah nodded gratefully. The exhaustion was overwhelming, now her body demanding rest after the intense physical and emotional strain of the day. Evening Star accompanied her to the teepee, helping her settle onto a bed of soft furs. Sleep now, Wasiku Winyan. Tomorrow we continue healing work. As Evening Star turned to leave, Sarah caught her hand. Thank you, she said simply, for everything. The Lakota healer's weathered face softened. You saved Swift Elk, helped create medicine that will save many more. No thanks needed between healers who share same path. With that, she departed, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Outside, she could hear the murmur of voices as the camp reorganized itself, adapting to the rapidly changing circumstances. Despite the uncertainty that still lay ahead, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment. They had exposed Hammond's biological weapons program, developed an effective treatment, and potentially prevented a war that would have devastated both communities. As sleep began to claim her, Sarah's hand moved instinctively to her abdomen, feeling the reassuring movements of her unborn child. This baby would be born into a world still filled with conflict and prejudice, but perhaps with one small corner where healing and cooperation had prevailed over hatred and division. It was a beginning. Dawn broke clear and cold over the Black Hills. Sarah woke to the sounds of the camp coming to life around her, voices calling, children laughing, the rhythmic chopping of wood for morning fires. For a moment, she was disoriented, the events of the previous day seeming almost dreamlike in their intensity and resolution. Reality returned quickly as she sat up, her body protesting after the exertions of the journey and confrontation. A young Lakota woman entered the teepee carrying a steaming wooden bowl. "Morning tea," she said in halting English. "Evening Star, say you drink all." Sarah accepted the bowl gratefully, recognizing the distinctive aroma of Evening Star's herbal mixture for strength and pain relief. She sipped slowly, feeling warmth spread through her tired body. Outside, the camp had transformed overnight. What had been a battleground in the process of evacuation was now a bustling community again. The Lakota had returned, typists were being re-erected, and life was resuming its normal patterns, though with an undercurrent of watchfulness that spoke of recent dangers not entirely past. Forrester found her as she emerged from the teepee, his expression both weary and satisfied. "Dr. Winters, glad to see you rested. We've had quite a development overnight." "What's happened?" Sarah asked, immediately alert. A delegation from Fort Laramie arrived at dawn. Captain Wilson Hammond, second in command, with a small escort. Apparently, news of Hammond's death and Reed's capture reached the fort through deserters from yesterday's battle. How did Wilson respond? "Better than I dared hope. He was never part of Hammond's inner circle, and he seems genuinely appalled by the biological weapons program. He's agreed to a formal ceasefire, and negotiations with Standing Bear." Forrester's smile was grim but satisfied. "Reed has been quite cooperative as well, providing detailed information about the program in exchange for consideration during his eventual court-martial." Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The immediate crisis had been averted, though much work remained to secure a lasting peace. "There's more," Forrester continued. "Captain Wilson brought a telegram for me from Washington. Agent Wells's superiors have authorized a full investigation into Hammond's activities with congressional oversight. And Collins reached Denver. The first stories about the Black Hills disease conspiracy will be in newspapers across the country within days." "So it's really over," Sarah said, still hardly believing it. "This phase, yes. The cleanup and reconciliation will take much longer." Forrester glanced toward where Evening Star was working with several Lakota women, preparing medicines for distribution to the remaining tuberculosis patients. "Your treatment formula is being heralded as a breakthrough, by the way. Wilson brought an army doctor who's eager to learn the preparation methods for use at the fort." Sarah smiled at the irony. "So Western medicine is now seeking knowledge from traditional Lakota healing. Hammond would be appalled." "Progress often comes from unexpected sources," Forrester observed. "Speaking of which, Standing Bear has requested your presence at the council meeting this morning. I believe he has a proposal for you." Curious, Sarah followed Forrester to the central council area where Standing Bear sat with his advisors and Captain Wilson. The atmosphere was formal but not hostile, a remarkable shift from the tensions of just days before. Standing Bear acknowledged her arrival with a dignified nod. "Dr. Winters, we have been discussing the future of relations between my people and the Wasiku in these hills. Captain Wilson agrees that changes must be made to prevent further conflict." Wilson, a weathered man in his 50s with a thoughtful demeanor, added, "Hammond's actions were unconscionable, Doctor. I want to assure you that they did not represent the official policy of the United States Army, whatever he may have claimed." Sarah accepted this with a non-committal nod, knowing that Hammond's biological weapons program, while not officially sanctioned, had been tacitly permitted by those who found its potential useful. "We have proposed a new arrangement," Standing Bear continued, "a neutral territory between the fort and our hunting grounds where both peoples may come for healing and trade. A place where your combined medicine can be practiced and taught." Sarah felt a jolt of surprise. It was as if he had plucked the idea directly from her conversation with Evening Star the previous night. "A healing center," she said slowly, on neutral ground. Yes, Standing Bear's expression remained dignified, but there was a hint of approval in his eyes. Evening Star has spoken of your skill and your respect for our ways. She believes such a place could benefit both peoples. And you would permit this a permanent Wasiku presence so close to your territory. A healing place is different from a fort or mining camp, Standing Bear said simply. It takes nothing from the earth except what is needed for medicine. It brings no soldiers or gold seekers, and, he paused, it would be under the protection of both peoples. Sacred ground where old hatreds are left outside. Captain Wilson added, the Army would provide supplies and official recognition. We've already suffered losses from this disease outbreak among our own men. Having access to effective treatment benefits everyone. The proposal was both pragmatic and visionary, a small step toward coexistence rather than conflict with healing as its foundation. Sarah thought of Swift Elk, saved by the combination of Western and Lakota medicine, and of all the others who might benefit from such an approach. I would need help, she said, her mind already turning to practical matters. Assistant healers from both communities supplies proper facilities. These can be arranged, Forrester assured her. The Department of the Interior would support such an initiative, especially as part of the resolution to Hammond's crimes. As they discussed details, Sarah noticed Evening Star watching from nearby, her expression unreadable. When there was a break in the conversation, Sarah approached the Lakota healer. Did you suggest this to Standing Bear? She asked quietly. Evening Star's weathered face remained impassive. The chief makes his own decisions, but he listens to those with wisdom to share. A faint smile touched her lips. He also sees what works. The medicine we created together saved many lives already. Would you be part of this healing center? Sarah asked, suddenly realizing how important the answer was to her. Their partnership, born of necessity and crisis, had become something she valued deeply. My place is with my people, Evening Star replied. But my people need healing, need bridge between old ways and new. She met Sarah's gaze directly. I will come, teach, learn. Perhaps together we find better way than either alone. Grey Wolf appeared beside his mother, having overheard the conversation. I will help also, he said, as scout, as translator. My feet walk in both worlds already. Sarah felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, hope, and a strange sense of homecoming, as if she had finally found her true purpose after years of searching. This unlikely partnership with Evening Star, this blending of healing traditions, represented everything she had originally sought in medicine, the chance to truly help others, to advance knowledge, to make a difference. The discussions continued throughout the day, details being refined, arrangements made. By evening, the framework of an agreement had been established. A healing center would be created in the neutral territory between Fort Laramie and the Lakota hunting grounds, staffed by practitioners of both traditional and Western medicine, under the joint protection of the Army and Standing Bear's people. As twilight fell, Sarah found herself sitting beside a small fire with Evening Star, Swift Elk, and Grey Wolf. The boy was excitedly describing his role in the previous day's events, his narrative growing more elaborate with each telling. And then I jump out to surprise soldiers, he exclaimed, demonstrating with dramatic gestures. They very scared of me. Grey Wolf laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. A true warrior, but one who should remember that the best victories come without fighting. Swift Elk considered this with surprising seriousness for a child his age. Like medicine, victory, stopping sickness without battle. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. That's the kind of healing we'll teach at the new center. Fighting disease, not people. The boy nodded thoughtfully. I help too. Learn both medicines like you. Evening Star exchanged a glance with Sarah, silent understanding passing between them. Swift Elk had shown not just courage, but a natural inclination toward healing. Perhaps he represented the future they were working toward, a generation that could move comfortably between traditions, taking the best from each. As night deepened around them, stars appearing in the clear mountain sky, Sarah felt the child within her move strongly. Soon this baby would be born into a world still fraught with conflict and division, but perhaps with one small corner where healing transcended boundaries. What will you name the child? Evening Star asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. Sarah placed a hand on her abdomen, considering. I don't know yet. Something that honors both worlds, perhaps. A name that speaks of new beginnings. Dawn, Grey Wolf suggested. And Petu, the time when night becomes day. Neither one nor the other, but the moment of transition. Sarah smiled, feeling the rightness of it. Dawn, yes, that would be fitting. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low, each lost in their own thoughts about the future taking shape before them. Tomorrow would bring challenges, practical matters of building the healing center, distributing the treatment to more patients, documenting the formula for wider use. But for tonight, it was enough to know they had found a path forward, one step at a time. The borders between their worlds remained, but they had discovered something important. Healing could cross those borders, creating connections where division had once prevailed. It wasn't a complete solution to the complex conflicts between their peoples, but it was a beginning, a small light in the darkness, showing what might be possible. And sometimes Sarah reflected as she gazed into the dying embers, beginnings were the most important medicine of all.